Chapter 1393. Too merciless. Who's that young man? He's able to fight on par with first senior brother. Isn't that unbelievable? Besides, his aura is only at the 7th layer martial monarch realm, but he has mastered the rules of fire. How talented! In the distance, many disciples of the martial sacred tower were attracted by Jun, who was standing on the fiery dragon. They began to discuss among themselves while guessing his strength. He actually failed to take down Zhuowen in front of so many junior brothers, and he instantly felt that he had lost face. Most importantly, Zhuowen's cultivation was 2 levels lower than his. Even if Zhuowen also grasped the power of laws, logically speaking, Zhuowen should be slightly stronger. Junior brother Zhun, you forced me to do this. Lung Quan's eyes were extremely cold. After saying this, the trident in his right hand slowly crumbled and turned into the rules of water before vanishing into thin air. Misty rain. Lung Quan reached out his right hand with his palm facing upwards. The surrounding ocean began to boil and surge upward like an upside-down waterfall. It was extremely terrifying. More water surged upward and eventually formed the shape of a bowl. Following this, Lung Quan let out a groan, causing the water bowl to collapse. Drip, drip, drip. Instantly, tiny droplets of water that were as thin as silk dripped down from the sky. The misty water droplets descended and formed a misty mist, giving it an ethereal feel. The water droplets covered a huge area, almost reaching a few hundred zhang. Yun was right at the center of the misty rain domain. Such a heavy pressure. Within the misty domain, Zhuowen frowned slightly. He actually felt a heavy pressure acting on his body. The pressure was extremely terrifying. It felt like it was going to crush him completely. His movements slowed down slightly, making it difficult for him to move. That's the Misty Rain domain, first senior brother's ultimate skill. It's a domain constructed with the rules of water. Within the Misty Rain domain, eldest senior brother is the absolute overlord. I'm afraid this person is finished. Looking at the misty rain, many disciples of the Martial Saint Tower were shocked. They never thought that Lung Quan would use such a powerful move against Yun. From this, it could be seen how much pressure this Zhuowen gave Lung Quan. Bush, bush. Numerous sonic booms resounded within the misty rain. Soon after, Zhuowen's pupils shrunk slightly as he discovered that the surrounding thin and long raindrops were like countless hidden weapons that rushed towards the fatal spots on Zhuowen's body. 7 Emotions Precious Seal. Zhuowen did not hesitate to use the 7 Emotions Treasured Seal. With the 3 Great Amplification Treasured Seals, Zhuowen's strength increased by several times. At the same time, a pair of enormous purple lightning wings sprouted from Zhuowen's back. The lightning wings unfurled, and Zhuowen disappeared from the spot as though he had teleported. Bush, bush, bush. When Zhuowen appeared again, he was already at the edge of the Misty Rain domain. However, just as he was about to step out of the domain, an invisible barrier blocked his path, causing him to retreat repeatedly. It's useless. The Misty Rain domain is completely sealed. There's no way you can escape. Lung Quan, who was at the center of the domain, had a sneer on his face. Behind him, the Kuei cow roared as it charged through the air with the intention of completely tearing Zhuowen apart. Xiao He! Yun exclaimed. Immediately, Xiao He's massive dragon body leaped up and clashed with Kuei once again. However, this time, the 2 of them were in the Misty Rain domain. Here, Kuei's strength was greatly increased, while Xiao He was suppressed. Therefore, in the battle between the 2, Xiao He was the one who was suppressed by Kuei. Junior brother Zhuowen, I gave you a chance in the past. Unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. It's too late to regret it now. Lung Quan sneered. Accompanied by the misty rain, his figure flickered like a ghost. So, in a blink of an eye, Lung Quan had teleported in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen suddenly twisted his body as he raised the tiger head clear gold spear in his hand. However, Lung Quan sneered and vanished in front of him. His spear missed. So, another sonic boom tore through the air. Lung Quan had already appeared behind Zhuowen at the instant he struck out with his spear. With a hideous smile, he slammed his right palm onto Zhuowen's back. Zhuowen seemed to sense it as the purple lightning wings on his back closed. A terrifying purple lightning emanated and blocked Lung Quan's strike. Dun, dun, dun. Under the terrifying palm strike, Zhuan grunted as he retreated a few steps back. His brows were tightly knitted together. In the Misty Rain domain, Lung Quan's speed was nearly at the level of teleportation. Even with his lightning wings, his speed was still inferior to the latter. Zhuan, where are you looking? Your purple lightning wings are not bad. To think that your speed is so fast. It should be more suitable for me. Lung Quan's voice sounded in Zhuan's ears once again. Following that, Zhuan realized that on his left, Lung Quan was charging over with a hideous smile. He pushed out his right palm as a terrifying force surged over like a swimming dragon. Void! Zhuan's eyes turned misty. Following that, a void force surged out from his body. This void force emanated, causing Lung Quan's actions to immediately slow down. 4 kills sword array. Before Lung Quan could even react, he was enveloped by the 4 kill sword array. The corroding forces were like countless blades that squeezed towards Lung Quan in a bid to mince him. Bang, bang, bang. Lung Quan's eyes were cold as the water laws constantly revolved around him to resist the surrounding corroding forces. Following that, he raised his hands as the water laws soared into the sky like a gigantic dragon. Boom! The 4 kill sword array was blasted apart as Lung Quan suddenly emerged. He surveyed his surroundings in a bid to find Zhuan's figure. Soon, he saw Zhuan floating in midair on his left. He saw Zhuan extend his right hand as a seal flashed in his palm. A dragon's roar emanated out. Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal. Clang. Immediately, thick black chains shot out from Zhuan's right palm. These chains were extremely fast. Before Lung Quan could even react, he was bound by layers of chains. Darn it, what is this? Lung Quan's pupils constricted to the size of needles as he could not help but roar. The chains were just too tough and terrifying. They bound him tightly, making it impossible for him to escape. Die! Zhuan ignored Lung Quan's roar as he stepped through the void. The tiger-head clear gold spear in his hand emitted a monstrous tiger's roar as it instantly appeared in front of Lung Quan. Following that, his right hand pressed against the end of the spear. So, the tiger-head clear gold spear transformed into a massive tiger as it descended from the sky, heading straight for Lung Quan's vitals. Do you think it's possible to kill me in my Misty Rain domain? Lung Quan's eyes were cold. Immediately, the surrounding misty rain churned and gathered in front of him, forming a circular shield. Ding! The tiger-head clear gold spear instantly arrived before emitting a metallic clang. It was unable to advance any further. Break it! Lung Quan roared as the surrounding misty rain forces drilled into his body. It caused Lung Quan's strength to multiply at a discernible rate as he grew stronger. Clang! The Heavenly Dragon Lock seal was shattered by Lung Quan. As for Lung Quan, he stepped through the air and grabbed the trident with his right hand. Like an arrow, he shot it out. Grand Slaughter Dragon Seal. Zhuan's eyes were extremely calm as a sanguine aura spewed out from his acupuncture points. Immediately, a massive blood-colored dragon appeared above his head. It was the Phantom of the Grand Slaughter Sacred Dragon. The Phantom of the Grand Slaughter Sacred Dragon lingered above Zhuan's head for a moment before it drilled into the top of his head. Following that, Zhuan's body began emitting a blazing blood beam. The surface of Zhuan's body was covered in traces of blood-red imprints. His limbs, body, and face were all covered in blood-red imprints. Even in his eyes, there was a small blood-red dragon that was rolling about. I wonder what kind of power the Grand Slaughter Dragon Seal and fire I can produce? Zhuan muttered softly as he took a step into the void. The purple lightning wings on his back blasted out bolts of lightning that surged into the sky. As for Zhuan, he appeared in front of Lung Quan as though he had teleported. With the Misty Rain domain augmenting me, my strength has increased by several times, or even dozens of times. Yet you still dare to fight me head-on. You are courting death. Seeing Zhuan advancing instead of retreating, Lung Quan laughed out loud. The corners of his mouth were filled with mockery. When he approached Zhuan, he suddenly punched out, causing countless water vortexes to form in the surrounding space. Courting death? Perhaps. Zhuan did not say much as he punched out as well. The wind from his fist howled, faintly containing the terrifying roar of a dragon and tiger. There was also the ear-piercing sound of tearing cloth. Boom! The instant the two fists collided in the void, a monstrous dragon roar accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of water spread out in the surrounding space. The thunderous collision grew louder and louder, more and more ear-piercing. It caused many disciples on the desolate grounds to cover their ears as they revealed looks of pain. Too merciless! Amidst the ear-piercing explosion, an indifferent voice soared into the clouds, reverberating in the void like a great bell. Immediately, the dragon roar grew louder and louder. Above the void, the phantom of the Taisha's sacred dragon appeared once again. It stretched across the void and soared into the sky. Kacha! A crisp sound rang out. Immediately after, all the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower were horrified to discover that cracks had appeared in Lung Quan's misty rain domain under the bombardment of the Taisha's sacred dragon's phantom. Furthermore, the range of the cracks grew larger and larger, eventually enveloping the entire domain. Boom! A dull thunder-like sound rang out as the domain completely collapsed. The moment the domain shattered, all the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower on the desolate grounds looked up. Following that, they were shocked to discover that Zhuan and Lung Quan were still floating in the air, facing each other. Their right fists were tightly pressed together, maintaining their attacking posture. Who won? What happened just now? Many disciples were at a loss. They didn't know what had just happened. Even Xiao Yu and the three elders of the Martial Saint Tower, who were fighting fiercely, had stopped. They all looked up and stared at the void where Zhuan and Lung Quan were. They were also waiting for the outcome of the battle between the two. A mouthful of blood fell from the sky. The sneer on Lung Quan's face gradually froze, becoming extremely ugly. The blood stain at the corner of his mouth was a ghastly sight. Chapter 1394. Martial Sacred Realm, cough cough cough. Lung Quan stared at Zhuan while coughing continuously. Fresh blood was spat out from his mouth as he fell backward. How is this possible? Did I just lose to you? While falling, Lung Quan raised his head and stared at the young man who was staring at him with a cold gaze. His heart was filled with despair. First senior brother lost? On the desolate ground, many disciples of the Martial Saint Tower were stunned at this moment. Their gazes shifted upwards and landed on the figure that was falling down like a meteor. They were unable to shift their gazes away for a long time. Bang! When Lung Quan's body landed on the ground, the disciples of the Martial Sacred Tower finally recovered from their shock. The disciples who were initially in disbelief glanced at Lung Quan's body on the ground once again. They finally collected their thoughts and believed that Lung Quan had indeed lost the battle. Meanwhile, as Lung Quan was defeated, the Kuei cow's strength was greatly weakened. Xiao He took advantage of the gap and swung its tail, slamming it heavily onto the ground. Brr! The Kuei cow uttered a cry, before it turned into a black ray and entered Lung Quan's forehead. Zhuan suddenly fell like a meteor, smashing into the ground and arriving at the crater where Lung Quan was. At that instant, Lung Quan's condition was not too good. His face was as pale as snow, and there was a shocking trail of blood at the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that he had suffered serious injuries from the previous clash. Zhuan's condition was slightly weak too. His face was slightly pale, but as soon as he struck Lung Quan down, he immediately took out a Snow Lotus lustrous pill and threw it into his mouth, suppressing the injuries on his body. Inside the deep pit, Lung Quan kept struggling, trying to get up. He glared at Zhuan. Bang! Zhuan raised his leg and stomped on Lung Quan's chest, before he said in a calm tone, "Where is the Lu Han Tian that you've captured?" Lung Quan spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with frustration. Now that Zhuan was stepping on him, it was simply too humiliating. Furthermore, it was in front of so many disciples of the Martial Saint Tower. As the first senior brother of the Martial Sacred Tower, he had completely lost his face today. Zhuan's actions immediately caused an uproar among the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower. Their Martial Saint Tower's strongest disciple, Lung Quan, was now being trampled under someone's foot. Furthermore, this person's cultivation was lower than Lung Quan's. I heard that the two of them were from the Divine Institute. That young man must be a student of the Divine Institute as well. How could he be so strong? Discussions broke out in the surroundings, but no one dared to step forward to help Lung Quan. After all, even Lung Quan was no match for Zhu. They would only be courting death if they went up against him. Bastard! Peak Lord Xiaoyu, is your divine college here to cause trouble? Our Martial Saint Tower may not be as strong as your Divine Institute, but we can't let you bully us like this. The three elders of the Martial Saint Tower were furious. They wanted to pounce forward to stop Zhuan, but they were stopped by Xiaoyu. I say, you three old fogies shouldn't slander us. Zhuan and I are not here to cause trouble for the Martial Saint Tower. We're here to ask for someone. Don't you understand? Xiaoyu was helpless as he continued, but you guys don't want to hand it over. What else can I do? I can only use force. Looking at Xiaoyu's actions, the three elders of the Martial Saint Tower were furious. However, there was nothing they could do. They were no match for Xiaoyu. Lung Quan spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with shock and anger as he glared at Zhu. He wanted to get up, but he was pinned down by Zhuowen's foot. What are you trying to do? Lung Quan roared. Zhuan waved his right hand and grabbed Lung Quan. He lifted him up and said indifferently, my request is not high. Just tell me where Big Brother Hantian is. Lung Quan's eyes flickered as he said, I've said it many times. Lu Hantian is not in the Martial Saint Tower. Even if you kill me, I won't know. Is that so? If that's the case, then you can die. Zhuowen's eyes were still calm, so calm that it was terrifying. After he finished speaking, the long spear in his hand shot towards Lung Quan's forehead like a venomous snake. The tip of the spear emitted a terrifying white light as it tore through the air, producing a strange hissing sound. Seeing the tip of the spear getting closer and closer, Lung Quan's pupils shrank to the size of needles. His body trembled with fear. He never thought that Zhuan would really kill him. Moreover, he would kill him in the Martial Saint Tower in front of so many junior brothers. I said, don't kill me. When the tip of the spear was only a few millimeters away from Lung Quan's forehead, Lung Quan shouted. In the face of death, Lung Quan finally gave in. He had cultivated to become an invincible martial emperor with great difficulty. He could not die like this. Swoosh! The tip of the spear stopped. A cherry-red wound appeared on Lung Quan's forehead. If the tip of the spear had moved a little further, it would have pierced through Lung Quan's forehead. Feeling the sharpness of the tip of the spear and the faint pain from his forehead, Lung Quan felt his legs go weak despite his strong will. Speak, Zhuan said indifferently as he looked down at Lung Quan with the spear in his hand. That Lu Hantian is in. Lung Quan's eyes darkened. Just as he was about to speak, a terrifying sonic boom exploded in the air. It was like the nine heavens' profound thunder reverberating in the void. Immediately after, a stalwart figure flew out from the crack in the 10th floor. The figure was tall and had a handsome face. His eyes were as black as ink and he looked extremely dashing. What caught everyone's attention was the aura emitted from his body. It was as deep as an abyss, extremely terrifying. His long hair danced wildly under the influence of the aura. It's the martial sacred. The martial sacred has come out from seclusion. As soon as the stalwart figure appeared, the disciples of the Martial Sacred Tower cheered. The three elders of the Martial Sacred Tower were overjoyed as they rushed to the Martial Sacred's side. The Martial Sacred scanned his surroundings and saw the depressing scene. It was obvious that a great battle had taken place. What exactly happened? The Martial Saint frowned slightly, feeling somewhat displeased. His gaze naturally landed on Lung Quan, who was being held in Zhuowen's hand, as his eyes narrowed into slits. Martial Sacred, this is what happened. The three elders of the Martial Sacred Tower began to explain the sequence of events. Of course, most of them were trying to belittle Xiaoyu and Zhuan. After hearing the explanation, the Martial Sacred glanced at Xiaoyu and said, Peak Leader Xiaoyu, what is the meaning of this? Are you here to cause trouble at the Martial Sacred Tower? Xiaoyu's eyes glistened as he said, That's not it. We're here to ask for a person from the Martial Sacred Tower. However, your first disciple, Lung Quan, has been evading our request, which is why the situation has come to this. A person? Who do you want? The martial sacred said coldly. Lu Hantian. Zhuan calmly replied. You're talking about Lu Hantian? The martial sacred's eyes suddenly glistened as his aura turned ferocious. He said in a cold tone, Lu Hannan, such a frivolous person, is indeed in the martial sacred tower. Frivolous person? Senior martial sacred, please don't slander us. I'm well aware of Brother Hantian's character. Besides, what exactly happened? Zhuan said with a cold gaze. The martial sacred harumphed and said, It seems like you don't know anything. That Lu Hantian did join the martial sacred tower previously, and his talent is not bad. I did have high hopes for him in the past. However, this Lu Hantian has the ambition of a wolf. I don't know where he got the insect corpse pill from, but he used it on my daughter, Ruliu. If I don't kill him, I won't be able to get rid of the hatred in my heart. It's the insect corpse pill? Zhuan's eyes widened as he mumbled to himself. He had heard of the insect corpse pill before. It was said that this pill was made from living insect corpses as the main ingredient and mixed with other supplementary ingredients. Once the insect corpse pill was consumed, the insect corpses inside the pill would come out and enter the body. Moreover, the insect corpse pill loved the flesh of the human body the most, and it especially loved the brain. Normally, a cultivator who consumed the insect corpse pill would become an idiot or a vegetable within a month. Furthermore, as time passed, the cultivator's body with the insect corpses would slowly be eaten away. In the end, the cultivator's body would turn into an empty shell and become nourishment for the insect corpses. It could be said that the insect corpse pill was an extremely sinister and vicious pill. It was something that would cause people's expressions to change. Do you think that I can spare such a despicable person? Even if it's your divine academy, don't even think about getting that Lu Hantian away today. He will die without a doubt. The martial sacred's voice became somewhat sinister as his veins popped out. Zhuan frowned as he raised the cold spring and said, Your disciple is in my hands. If you don't want him to die, I think it's better for you to hand over Lu Hantian. The martial sacred's expression turned sluggish as he stared at the cold spring in Zhuan's hand. He clenched his fists and coldly said to Xiao Yu, Peak Master Xiao Yu, does your divine academy really plan to fall out with the martial sacred tower? Although your divine academy has 3 saints, in the divine specter realm, saints are not allowed to interfere in the competition between the divine specter realm's local powers. Even if my divine martial sacred tower is not as strong as your divine academy, we will not easily compromise. Xiao Yu frowned and did not reply. His gaze fell on Zhuan as if he was asking for Zhuan's opinion. I don't know if it's appropriate to compromise or not. I only know that if you don't take out Big Brother Hantian, this cold spring will die. As he spoke, Zhuan held the cold spring in his right hand and the long spear in his left hand. The tip of the spear was pointed at the cold spring's vitals, as if it could pierce through the cold spring at any moment. No. Master, save me. Lung Quan trembled, his face was as white as snow. The fear of death had caused him to speak incoherently. You bastard! The martial sacred was so angry that his entire body was trembling. It was rare for him to hesitate. Lung Quan was the #1 genius of the divine martial sacred tower that he had painstakingly nurtured. Furthermore, he was an invincible emperor lord. He had poured a lot of effort into him. Naturally, he was unwilling to let Lung Quan fall. Hand over Lu Hantian. Chapter 1395. Joining hands, Master. Lung Quan cried out anxiously. Especially when he felt the piercing pain between his eyebrows, the fear in his heart grew even stronger. Wait! The martial saint shouted. Immediately, Zhuowen's spear, which had continued to penetrate deeper, stopped moving forward. Zhuowen raised his head slightly and stared at the martial saint. He said calmly, If you don't want him to die, then exchange him with Lu Hantian. The martial saint's face turned ugly. He snorted coldly and took out a communication jade talisman. After sending a message, his gaze fell back onto Zhuan. I've already ordered someone to bring Lu Hantian here. Can you put down your spear now? Hearing this, Zhuan nodded his head and moved the spear away from Leng Quan's forehead. The latter let out a sigh of relief. "Can you let me go now?" Leng Quan said to Zhuan with a gloomy face. "Shut up if you don't want to die," Zhuan said coldly. Leng Quan's face froze. Although he was furious, he did not dare to refute. After all, his life was in Zhuan's hands. Soon, 3 figures flew out from the 10th floor of the Marshal Saint Tower. Among the 3 figures, 2 were wearing golden armor. One was holding a spear and the other was carrying an axe. They were the 2 disciples of the Marshal Saint Tower who had chased Lu Hantian before. Among the 2, there was a man who was staggering. Under the 2's restraint, he looked weak and was covered in injuries. Zhuowen's eyes blazed as he looked at the 2 people who were holding him captive. His body trembled. This person who was covered in wounds was none other than Lu Hantian. Marshal Saint. The 2 disciples wearing golden armor came before the Marshal Saint and bowed respectfully. Their eyes were filled with doubt. They were curious. Why did the Marshal Saint suddenly summon them? The Marshal Saint ignored the 2 disciples. He glanced down at Zhuan and said calmly, "I've brought Lu Hantian here. I believe you should let go of Leng Quan now?" After hearing the Marshal Saint's words, the 2 disciples realized that their senior brother of the Marshal Saint Tower, Leng Quan, was being held by an unfamiliar young man like a chick. Senior brother Leng Quan? Who is that young man? Did he defeat senior brother Leng? The 2 disciples exchanged glances with each other. Their hearts were filled with astonishment. From the conversation between Zhuan and the Marshal Saint, it seemed like this young man was here to find Lu Hantian. The originally weak Lu Hantian opened his eyes slightly and instantly noticed Zhuowen below him. He couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Is he a friend of Lu Hantian? The pupils of the 2 disciples shrank, and a strange feeling arose in their hearts. "Big brother Hantian, wait for me. I'll save you in a moment." Zhuan smiled at Lu Hantian, then stared coldly at the Marshal Saint and said, "Senior Marshal Saint, how about we hand over our hostages at the same time?" The Marshal Saint's eyes flickered as he nodded and said, "Sure." Saying this, the 2 of them tacitly pushed out their hostages. Soon, the exchange was completed. After receiving Lu Hantian, Yun did not hesitate. He cupped his fists at the Marshal Saint and said, "Senior Marshal Saint, I won't disturb you any longer. Farewell." After saying this, Zhuan exchanged glances with Xiao Yu, and a pair of purple lightning wings appeared on his back. With a rumble of thunder, Zhuowenhua turned into a purple shadow and disappeared from the spot with Lu Hantian. Xiao Yu followed closely behind. He had caused a ruckus at the Marshal Saint Tower. To him, this was not a place to stay for long. Once he received Lu Hantian, he naturally prepared to escape. After causing a ruckus at my Marshal Saint Tower, you're actually planning to leave. Don't you think that this is too cheap? The Marshal Saint was not angry. Instead, he laughed. After receiving Leng Quan, he threw out a punch. Instantly, a surge of martial law condensed. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, and within the dark clouds, a gigantic fist of several hundred feet shot out. Rumble! The gigantic fist was like a mountain as it smashed down. It landed on top of Zhuowen's head, wanting to completely shatter him. How terrifying! Feeling the gigantic fist smashing down from the sky, Zhuowen's gaze turned extremely serious. Be careful! Xiao Yu furiously roared as fire law burst out from his body and revolved around his body. Then he raised his hands and flames turned into a gigantic fire dragon that soared into the sky. Rumble! The fire dragon collided with the fist, and a dull explosion resounded. The surrounding space violently shook. Puchi! Xiao Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, the fire dragon formed by fire law collapsed inch by inch under the fist. Xiao Yu violently retreated, his face as pale as snow. What no one noticed was that when the Marshal Saint launched his attack and Xiao Yu retreated, a ghostly figure rushed out from the grass not far away at an extremely fast speed. Swoosh! The sound of the air being torn apart rang out. Unknowingly, the ghostly figure had appeared behind Xiao Yu. Then, a palm fiercely landed on Xiao Yu's back. Puchi! Xiao Yu was caught off guard. He did not expect that there would be a sneak attack from behind. He spat out another mouthful of blood and fell forward. "For you." Xiao Yu was both shocked and furious. Fire law burst out from his body and revolved around him. He turned around and stared at the figure that had launched a sneak attack. That figure did not say anything and attacked again. A wave of black cold chi rushed out like a python and attacked Xiao Yu with a rumbling sound. Rumble! The power of the laws of fire around Xiao Yu had only been hastily set up, so it collapsed under the attack that was ready to be launched. Xiao Yu was like a kite with a broken string. He flew backward and landed heavily on the ground, stirring up layers of dust. Zhuowen's face changed slightly. Purple lightning wings unfolded and he instantly flew to the pit where Xiao Yu was and helped him up. "Old man Xiao, are you all right?" Zhuowen asked worriedly. "Cough, cough, cough. I'm fine." Xiao Yu coughed a few times. Then he raised his head and stared at the figure that had launched a sneak attack. He gritted his teeth and said, "Xianzhong, I didn't expect it to be you." Not only Zhuowen and Xiao Yu, but the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower and the Martial Saint were also stunned. They did not expect that someone would appear out of nowhere. "Xianzhong, the peak master of Xianming Peak of Jiaxin College?" The Martial Saint muttered in a low voice. Xianzhong and Xiao Yu were both peak masters of Jiaxin College. Why would Xianzhong suddenly appear and launch a sneak attack on Xiao Yu, causing him to be heavily injured? Yun naturally noticed Xianzhong floating in the air. His gaze was extremely cold. The Xianzhong was too much. He actually dared to launch a sneak attack on Xiao Yu. "Old man Xiao, take this Snow Lotus Jade pill first." Zhuan took out a pill from his spiritual ring and handed it to Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu was startled. Soon after, he nodded his head and received the medicinal pill from Zhuowen. As he placed it in his mouth, a surge of medicinal power spread out and circulated throughout Xiao Yu's body, causing his entire body to feel warm. "Martial Uncle Xianzhong, what do you mean by this?" Zhuowen said indifferently. "What do I mean? You're a dog who deceives his master and kills his fellow disciples. Today, I'm here to get rid of you for Jiaxin College." Xianzhong's voice was extremely cold. Deceiving his master and killing his fellow disciples? However, Zhuowen laughed and said indifferently, "It's clearly you who is abusing your position to avenge a private grudge for your own selfish reasons. Now you're saying it in such a dignified manner. Don't you find it laughable? Also, you launched a sneak attack on Old Man Xiao. Isn't that killing your fellow disciples? Do you still have any shame?" Xianzhong narrowed his eyes and replied indifferently, "Xiao Yu is a lunatic. I won't kill him. My target is you. If you die, everything will be over." Xianzhong's gaze landed on the Martial Saint not far away. He smiled and said, "Martial Saint, why don't we work together? This guy came to the Martial Saint Tower and even defeated your head disciple, Leng Quan. He doesn't put you in his eyes at all. Moreover, I know a little about that Lu Hantian's special physique. Even if I don't make a move, you'll make a move to snatch it. Why don't we work together?" The Martial Saint raised his eyebrows and glanced at Xianzhong. He didn't expect Xianzhong to know his secret. Indeed, it was as Xianzhong said. He definitely wouldn't let Zhuowen take away Lu Hantian because Lu Hantian was related to his opportunity to break through. The so-called molestation of the Martial Saint Tower's young miss was just a reason he casually arranged to capture Lu Hantian. Their young miss wasn't poisoned by the insect corpse pill at all. However, he didn't expect that Lu Hantian would slip away halfway. What happened next was that Lu Hantian was brought back to the Martial Saint Tower and Zhuan broke into the Martial Saint Tower to save him. No matter what, this Zhuan is still a disciple of the Divine Academy, right? If I kill him like this, won't the Divine Academy blame me? The Martial Saint narrowed his eyes. He naturally thought about capturing Lu Hantian, but he didn't plan to kill Zhuan. After all, the latter was a genius of the Divine Academy. If he really killed him, it might alert the Saint Realm experts of the Divine Academy. Don't worry. He's just a personal disciple of the mysterious peak. If you help me kill this kid, the responsibility will be on my head at most. It won't involve you. Xianzhong sneered. The Martial Saint raised his eyebrows. If Xianzhong was willing to take all the responsibility, He didn't need to worry about anything. After all, Xianzhong was the peak master of the 9th peak in the inner courtyard. If he killed a personal disciple, he would at most be punished. He wouldn't be in danger of dying. If that's the case, we can work together. This kid is indeed a little arrogant. Although he has mastered the law of fire, his actions are extremely arrogant. If we don't teach him a lesson, it'll be hard to justify. The martial saint's mouth was full of coldness. He took a step forward and landed beside Xianzhong. A terrifying pressure flowed out. Xianzhong, you've gone too far. If you dare to kill Zhuowen, I'll report today's matter to the 3 martial uncles. Xiao Yu's face changed slightly as he shouted angrily. Xianzhong sneered, you can report it however you want. Today, I'll definitely kill Zhuowen. He dared to kill Xianqi. Even if he doesn't die, he'll die. Brother Martial Saint, do it. Xiao Yu, you can help me stall him. I'll deal with that little bastard Zhuowen. Chapter 1396. The Death of Cold Spring. The Martial Saint nodded. The law of martial that he had comprehended was of a higher level than Xiao Yu's law of martial. If they were to fight, he would be completely capable of suppressing Xiao Yu. In addition, because of Xianzhong's sneak attack, Xiao Yu had suffered a serious injury. Even with the effect of the Snow Lotus Jade Lustrous Pill, the strength that he could unleash was extremely limited. Xiao Yu roared angrily. The law of fire rushed out from his body like a fire python and circled around his body. At the same time, wisps of void power gushed out from under his feet. Xiao Yu took a step forward and entered the void. In the next instant, he appeared in front of Xianzhong. Xianzhong narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "It seems like you have comprehended a lot of things in the empty space stone tablet. You can use the empty space stone tablet, but you can't stop me." Xianzhong sneered. The law of mysterious underworld gushed out. He took a step and passed by Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu originally wanted to chase after them, but the martial saint had already arrived. His right hand descended from the sky as martial law surged out, forming a mountain-like giant hand that smashed towards Xiao Yu. Boom! Boom! The battle between the 2 half-saints caused the heavens to collapse and the earth to rend, and the sun and moon to dim. Without exception, Xiao Yu was completely suppressed by the martial sage. However, as Xiao Yu controlled a trace of void energy, the martial sage was unable to take him down in a short period of time. Little bastard, you will definitely die today. Xianzhong was very fast. He landed in front of Zhuowen in an instant. The Xianming law turned into countless black tentacles. They swept out and wrapped around Zhuowen from all directions. Heavenly Dragon Locking Seal. Zhuowen's eyes were dark and cold. A monstrous light erupted from the dragon seal on his right hand. Soon after, countless thick chains shot out. At the same time, Zhuowen's left eye shot out a fiery light, bursting forth with a powerful law of fire that adhered to the chains, increasing their power by several times. Boom! Boom! The Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal and the mysterious underworld law collided with each other. Continuous explosions rang out. Every time the two collided, the aftershock produced could collapse space. Seeing this, many disciples of the Martial Saint Tower narrowed their eyes and their faces were filled with shock. You've actually grasped the law of fire. Looks like that old fellow Xiao Yu taught it to you. As long as your cultivation reaches the 9th level of the Emperor realm, you'll probably be able to directly advance to the half-step Saint realm. Xianzhong squinted his eyes, which were filled with intense killing intent. Zhuowen's talent had already made him feel threatened. He had already grasped the Saint Rune Law at the 7th level Martial Emperor realm. If he continued to cultivate, it was very likely that he would catch up to him. At that time, it would be very difficult for him to kill him. This brat must die. Thinking about this, the killing intent in Xianzhong exploded like a volcano. Boom! Immediately, the power of the dark underworld laws increased by several times and suppressed the Heavenly Dragon Sealing Seal. Zhuowen's expression was slightly ugly. At the same time, he glanced at the extremely weak Lu Hantian behind him and sighed softly. He said in a low voice, "I can only let the Buddhist avatar come here." In a mountain a few thousand miles away from the Martial Saint Tower, a majestic temple stood at the top of the mountain. White mist lingered around the temple and one could vaguely see the outline of the temple. The area of the temple was very large. In front of the mountain gate, there was a plaque with the words Great Thunderclap Temple written on it. The calligraphy was like dragons and snakes, and the eyebrows were like dancing phoenixes. The identity of the temple was obvious. It was the Great Layin Temple, second only to Excellent Divine College in the Divine Netherworld. In the temple, there was a huge pagoda. At the top of the pagoda, a figure was sitting cross-legged with golden light shining all over his body. There was a halo behind the figure's head, which made him look holy and clean. At a closer look, the figure wasn't old. He was about 23 or 24 years old. At this moment, his eyes were wide open and blazing golden light shone from them. Buddhawan, what's wrong with you? You look uneasy today. Is there something on your mind? Not far from the figure, there was a praying mat. An old monk wearing a kasaya was sitting cross-legged on it. His eyes were closed and he didn't open them. The words just now came from the mouth of this old monk. Master Shin-Xen, I have some matters to take care of. I hope you can send me to the Martial Saint Tower. Buddhawan said respectfully. The hunchbacked old monk in front of him wasn't simple. His cultivation was unfathomable and he was the only saint in the Great Layin Temple. Master Shin-Xen's attainments in space were very deep. Although he didn't fully comprehend the laws of space, it was already very impressive. In the Great Layin Temple, Master Shin-Xen was practically a godlike existence. Master Shin-Xen slowly put down the prayer beads in his hand and opened his eyes. He looked deeply at Buddhawan and smiled. Karma is a cycle. Your karma is in the Martial Saint Tower. Go and remember to come back early. Buddhawan was stunned. He immediately bowed and said in a deep voice, Thank you, Master. Master Shin-Xen nodded. Then he waved his sleeve and a surge of spatial energy gushed out, enveloping Buddhawan. Soon, Buddhawan's figure disappeared from the top of the pagoda. Brother Hantian, you should leave this place first. The aftermath of my battle with Xianzhong might affect you. While resisting Xianzhong's attack, Zhuan instructed Lu Hantian behind him. The latter nodded and staggered away from the battle between Xianzhong and Zhuan. Right now, he was too weak. If he followed Zhuan, he would only be a burden to the latter. But Xianzhong shouted coldly. The Xianming law became even more violent and it completely shattered the heavenly dragon lock seal. The power of the Xianming law came one after another and it was like black raindrops that covered Zhuo Wen's entire body. Tai Sha Dragon Seal. Zhuan didn't panic. He waved his right hand and countless blood chi spurted out, forming a huge blood dragon above his head. The Tai Sha Saint Dragon's huge dragon body coiled up layer by layer, like a coiling dragon, and surrounded Zhuowen in the middle. Boom, boom, boom. The power of the mysterious underworld law arrived in an instant and blasted on the Tai Sha Saint Dragon's shadow. However, it couldn't break the dragon's huge body. Old bastard Xianzhong, where are you looking? Xianzhong frowned slightly and stared at the Tai Sha Saint Dragon's shadow below. Unexpectedly, a familiar voice came from behind him. Xianzhong suddenly turned his head and was stunned to discover that Zhuowen had unknowingly appeared in front of him. At this moment, Zhuowen's body was covered with blood-red marks that looked like dazzling patterns. It was extremely strange and ferocious. Boom! Zhuowen threw out a punch. The power of the Tai Sha Dragon Seal combined with the law of fire made this punch extremely powerful. Xianzhong was caught off guard. In a hurry, he stretched out his hands to meet Zhuowen's punch. Bang! Then, a white airwave with a radius of dozens of meters spread out in all directions. Xianzhong groaned and retreated dozens of steps. Zhuowen actually forced a half-saint back? So terrifying? In an instant, the desolate ground became slightly silent. The various combat strengths that Zhuowen had displayed earlier were indeed slightly terrifying and shocking. He had defeated the invincible sovereign Lord Leng Quan and now Xianzhong, who had mastered the law of mysterious underworld. Not far away, Leng Quan's face turned ugly. At the same time, a trace of fear rose in his heart. He didn't expect Zhuowen to be so terrifying. I'll capture Lu Hantian. Let's see how Zhuowen can still be arrogant. Lung Quan's eyes flickered. In an instant, his attention fell on Lu Hantian, who was not far away from Zhuan. He stepped into the air and flew towards Lu Hantian. Swoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air immediately attracted Zhuan's attention. Then he saw Lung Quan rushing towards Lu Hantian. His eyes were filled with shock and anger. Lung Quan, how dare you? Having said that, the purple lightning wings on Zhuan's back spread open. He turned into a lightning shadow and tried to stop Lung Quan. Zhuan, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Your opponent is me. Xian Zhong sneered and stood in front of Zhuan. The terrifying law of mysterious underworld was like a wall, blocking in front of Zhuan. At the same time, the law of mysterious underworld gathered on the surface of Xian Zhong's body and became even more violent. In the end, it gathered into a giant bird that covered the sky. The giant bird was formed by the law of mysterious underworld. When it spread its wings, it swept out a gale that contained a terrifying chill. Zhuan took a few steps back and stared at the giant bird behind Xian Zhong. His eyes were solemn. It was probably Xian Zhong's armor soul that suppressed the giant bird. It seemed like Xian Zhong was serious. Lu Hantian, you can't escape from my palm. On the other side, Lung Quan laughed and threw a palm strike. Immediately, Lu Hantian spat out a mouthful of blood and flew back. At the same time, Lung Quan grabbed Lu Hantian's neck with his right hand and looked at Zhuan provocatively. Zhuan, do you really think you're the savior of the world? You don't take my martial saint tower seriously at all. You even want to save Lu Hantian. You're just asking for death, Lung Quan sneered. His voice was filled with mockery. Let go of him or you'll die a horrible death, Zhuan said in a deep voice. The smile on Lung Quan's face grew wider. He said, Are you kidding? If you say I'll die a horrible death, then come and kill me. With that, Lung Quan threw a punch at Lu Hantian's abdomen. The latter's back bent and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Come and kill me. Lung Quan laughed loudly. His face was filled with pride. Obviously, the defeat at the hands of Zhuan had made him very angry. Now, he was venting his anger on Lu Hantian. Suddenly, the smile on Lung Quan's face froze. Then, a Buddhist commandment blade swept out from behind him and pierced through his chest. Blood splattered everywhere. Lung Quan spat out a mouthful of blood. He lowered his head and stared blankly at the Buddhist commandment blade that pierced through his chest. Then he slowly turned his head. Behind him, a young monk with a halo on the back of his head was staring at him indifferently. For you. Lung Quan's eyes were filled with fear. He had never seen this young monk behind him. Why did this person want to kill him? The person who will kill you. The Buddhist commandment blade in his hand suddenly swept out. Golden light shone brightly. Immediately, Lung Quan's body was torn into pieces. Blood mist filled the air and exploded. Chapter 1397. Saving a Life. Silence. The entire desolate land of the Martial Saint Tower was completely silent. One could even hear a pin drop. Even the Martial Saint and Xiao Yu, who were fighting not far away, stopped fighting and stared blankly at the scene. At this moment, Lung Quan was actually killed by a strange monk. This was truly unbelievable. You dare to kill Lung Quan? I'll kill you. The Martial Saint was silent for a moment. Then he roared toward the sky. His martial laws surged out and condensed into a several thousand feet tall illusory figure of a cultivator behind him. The illusory figure of the cultivator had blurry facial features. It had a muscular body. Every movement of its body contained a terrifying might. It was extremely frightening. Xiao Yu's expression changed slightly. He clenched his teeth and also unleashed his fire laws. They formed a huge fire dragon and surged toward the illusory figure of the cultivator. Scram! The martial saint shouted coldly. He leapt up and stood on the shoulder of the illusory figure of the cultivator. With a thought, the illusory figure of the cultivator's enormous fist rumbled and smashed into the fire dragon. Rumble! The illusory figure of the cultivator's might was extremely terrifying. With that punch, the fire dragon roared and collapsed inch by inch. Pucci! At the same time, Xiao Yu vomited a mouthful of blood. He fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. The martial saint did not pay any attention to Xiao Yu. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the Buddhist rune. The illusory figure of the cultivator beneath his feet stepped forward. Every step caused the ground to tremble and rumble. In an instant, he arrived before the Buddhist rune. His right hand pressed down from the sky. It rumbled like a mountain as it smashed toward the Buddhist rune. Amitabha, 10,000 Buddhas greeting. The Buddhist rune stood there quietly with his palms together. His eyes shone with Buddhist light. Instantly, illusory figures of ancient Buddhas appeared behind him. They were so densely packed that one could not see the end of them. Countless illusory figures of ancient Buddhas opened their eyes and shot out Buddhist light. The Buddhist light formed a huge bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. It enveloped the Buddhist rune and Lu Hantian, forming a golden defense. Rumble. The illusory figure of the cultivator's hand fell from the sky and landed on the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. Then, an ear-piercing explosion sounded like an earthquake. However, the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl was like a solid rock, immovable like a mountain. Instead, it was the right hand of the martial artist's illusory figure that was directly repelled. Amitabha Sutra? Your master Xian Xen from the temple? The martial saint was startled as he stared at the young monk with his palms together. The young monk was tall and slender, wearing a white monk robe. He held 2 strings of Buddha beads in his left hand and a Buddhist commandment blade in his right. The Buddha, the martial word as his Buddha was his Buddha's strength was much stronger than a monarch of the same level. A 9th layer Buddha was comparable to an invincible monarch lord. Of course, if a Buddha had comprehended the power of law, his strength would be even more terrifying. Evidently, the young monk before him was a Buddha that had comprehended the power of laws. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to block the all-out attack of a martial saint. The Buddhist scriptures were formed from the Buddha's eye of the Buddha demon eye. He had a comprehension of the Buddhist Tao that was hard for ordinary people to reach. Furthermore, he was heavily nurtured by Grandmaster Xian Xen. It was not strange for him to reach the 9th layer of Buddha in just a few years. Fo Wen raised his head slightly and opened his golden eyes. He stared at the martial saint and said, "Saving a life is more meritorious than building a 7-storied pagoda. Martial saint, can you spare these people?" The moment he said that, the entire place fell silent. Many disciples of the martial saint tower stared at the young monk in front of them with strange gazes. This monk had just used his Buddhist commandment blade to kill Leng Quan. Moreover, he had taken Leng Quan's yuanying without any shame. Now, he was talking about saving a life. The contrast was too great. There was no doubt that the young monk in front of him was an absolute weirdo. The martial saint's face turned green and purple, and finally, it turned red. The Buddhist words had deeply stimulated his soul, causing his killing intent to surge. "Are you mocking me? You killed my personal disciple, and now you want me to save a life? Do you take me for a fool? Even if you are the successor of Master Xian Xen, I will still kill you today." The martial saint's killing intent surged. His entire body merged with the martial artist's silhouette. Immediately, the martial artist's silhouette became more and more solid. Its muscles swelled. It was originally a silhouette, but now, it seemed more and more solid. The martial artist's silhouette also became more and more solid. The aura on its surface was also extremely terrifying. It was as powerful and profound as a 10,000-foot tall mountain. The martial saint threw out a punch and heavily smashed onto the surface of the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. Muffled sounds of impact rang out once again. The bowl-shaped golden alms bowl, which was originally as immovable as a mountain, began to tremble under the martial saint's punches. However, it was still barely able to hold on. Not far away, Zhuowen frowned. The martial saint's strength was somewhat out of his expectations. His strength was most likely above Xian Zhong's. No wonder Xiao Yu had praised the martial saint's talent. The law of martialism that he had comprehended should not be a simple law of martialism. "Zhuowen, where are you looking? Die for me." A cold voice rang out. Then, Xian Zhong rushed over like a vigorous cheetah. He was as fast as lightning and instantly arrived in front of Jun. The giant bird formed by the law of mysterious underworld followed closely behind him. Jun narrowed his eyes. The power of the void filled the air and attached itself to the purple lightning wings. Instantly, his speed reached the extreme as he escaped into the void. In the next moment, he appeared a few hundred meters away. Sigh. I can only use that thing. I have to end this quickly. Zhuan sighed softly. He raised his hands. Instantly, terrifying ice and fire energies burst out from his body. One was the dark cold poison and the other was the 9 flames karmic fire. Both of them were heavenly rank energies and their power was terrifying. Then, Zhuan combined the 2 energies. With crackling sounds, the dark cold poison and the 9 flames karmic fire combined to form a palm-sized palace. On the surface of the palace, 9 colors were constantly changing. Within the 9 colors, there was a strand of black light that flashed repeatedly. What is that? Xianzhong narrowed his eyes and stared at the palace in Zhuowen's right hand. A tinge of fear rose in his heart. In the Ice-Fire Palace, he could feel the aura of the Ice and Fire Dual Hall in the inner yard. Ice-Fire Palace. Zhuan ignored Xianzhong's question. He clenched his right hand and swung it. Instantly, the Ice-Fire Palace in his palm cut through the void and landed in front of Xianzhong. Xianzhong did not dare to be negligent. He waved his right hand and commanded the giant bird behind him to attack the Ice-Fire Palace. Expand! Zhuan faintly spat out this word. Then, the Ice-Fire Palace swelled to the extreme. In the end, it swelled from the size of a palm to several thousand feet in size. It seemed to have transformed into a new ice and fire dual extreme hall. In the blink of an eye, the Ice-Fire Palace suppressed the giant bird. The latter did not even have time to react before it was trapped in the palace. What? Shock appeared in Xianzhong's eyes. He hadn't expected such an unforeseen event. He was just about to retreat when Zhuowen's indifferent voice resounded once more. Explode! Rumble! An earth-shaking explosion occurred. Before Xianzhong could leave the Ice and Fire Palace, the latter had already burst apart. Terrifying 9 types of flames rushed out and instantly swallowed Xianzhong's entire body. Ah! Amidst the explosion, a miserable cry resounded across the sky. The owner of the miserable cry was Xianzhong. The explosion lasted for 10 breaths of time before the explosive energy gradually weakened. After the explosive energy faded, an extremely miserable figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The figure was none other than Xianzhong. At that moment, Xianzhong's clothes were tattered and he was bald. His skin was charred black and he looked extremely frightening. Ah! Xianzhong roared towards the sky. His roar was filled with rage. He was actually in such a miserable state in the hands of a junior like Zhuan. It was a humiliation to him. Zhuan, you little bastard. I will definitely kill you. Then I will pull out your tendons and peel off your bones. I will skin you alive and let you beg me to kill you. Xianzhong was almost crazy. His eyes turned red as he looked around, searching for Zhuowen's figure. Old dog, where are you looking? Your grandfather is above you. A mocking voice sounded. Xianzhong raised his head abruptly. He was stunned when he saw Zhuowen floating in the sky. His right hand was holding a palm-sized ice-fire palace. Swoosh! Perhaps because Zhuowen noticed Xianzhong's gaze, the smile on his face grew even wider. With a swing of his right hand, the ice and fire palace flew out of his hand. It instantly turned into a giant palace that was hundreds of feet tall, suppressing Xianzhong inside. Explode! Zhuan escaped into the void and disappeared from the palace. Then, the ice-fire palace in the void exploded again. This time, the explosion was even more terrifying. The explosion spread out and covered an area of a few thousand feet. It almost covered the sky where the Marshal Saint Tower was. It was filled with dazzling light. On the wasteland, many disciples of the Marshal Saint Tower twitched their eyelids. They had to admit that Xianzhong was unlucky to be hit by the same attack twice. Moreover, the might of these 2 moves was so terrifying that even a semi-sage expert could die. So, it was likely that Xianzhong would be in a precarious situation. At the same time, Lun calmly took out a nascent soul from his spiritual ring. It was the nascent soul of Xian Qi that Jun killed in the inner yard. Xian Qi was a 9th-level martial emperor. Moreover, he was not an ordinary 9th-level martial emperor. His nascent soul contained an enormous amount of energy. Zhuan took out the Fushi cauldron without hesitation and stuffed it into the Fushi cauldron. Suddenly, the Fushi cauldron shone brightly. Rumble! A huge hand stretched out from the cauldron. Then, a second huge hand stretched out. 2 mountain-like arms stretched out and reached into the explosion. They grabbed a figure that was in a sorry state. Upon closer inspection, the figure was none other than Xian Zhong. At this moment, Xian Zhong's aura was extremely weak. After being attacked by the Ice Fire Palace twice, he was exhausted even though he was a half-saint who had mastered the law. Old man Xiao, the inner yard won't blame me for killing this old dog, right? Zhuan suddenly asked Xiao Yu, who was severely injured not far away. At this moment, Xiao Yu was stunned like a statue. The scene just now was really shocking. Chapter 1398. The martial saint defeated Xiao Yu was not the only one. The disciples of the martial saint tower and even the martial saint who was attacking the golden bowl were stunned. Xian Zhong was the peak master of the Xianming Peak, one of the 9 peaks of Jiaxin College. He was a half-saint who had mastered the law of Xianming. Yet he had been defeated by a junior. Zhuan had even declared that he would kill Xian Zhong. These words, in the ears of many people, actually sounded so sarcastic and ear-piercing. Then I am your martial uncle. If you dare to kill me, you will be disrespecting your master and your ancestors. Xian Zhong twisted his body and struggled. However, he could not move at all under the suppression of the 2 giant hands. When he heard Zhuan declare that he would kill him, he panicked and could not help but scream. You ambushed old man Xiao and teamed up with the martial saint to kill me. Why don't you feel that you are disrespecting your master and your ancestors? Zhuan sneered and said, Now that you have been defeated by me, don't you find it ridiculous to say such words? Xian Zhong was stunned. He quickly turned his head to look at Xiao Yu and said, Junior brother Xiao Yu, are you going to allow your disciple to do as he pleases? I am his martial uncle. It is intolerable for him to kill me. As a senior brother, you ambushed me from behind. As a martial uncle, you teamed up with the martial saint to kill Zhuan. It is not intolerable for Zhuan, it is you. Xiao Yu slowly stood up. His eyes were cold and emotionless. Xiao Yu, what are you talking about? Are you saying? Xian Zhong's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Xiao Yu's words gave him an ominous feeling. Huan, just do it. I will bear all the responsibility for you, Xiao Yu said indifferently. Zhuan nodded. He leapt up and landed on the 2 giant hands. He arrived before Xian Zhong at lightning speed. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Martial uncle Xian Zhong, we have no enmity between us. You are my martial uncle. I should respect you. However, when the Blue Dragon Hall came to ask for me, you helped the tyrant to capture me and even tried to kill me. Actually, it's been a long time. I've already forgotten about it. But you shouldn't have done that. Your disciple, Xian Qi, attacked my friend, and you've been targeting me. Now, you want to kill me because of a grudge. I'm not a saint. I can't let a scourge like you live. With that, Duan swung his right hand. The tiger head clear golden spear pierced through the void and slashed across Xian Zhong's neck. Puchi! A line of blood shot out. Immediately, a head soared into the sky along with the line of blood. It turned into a parabola as it fell from the sky. It rolled a few times on the ground before finally coming to a stop. At that moment, the atmosphere around the Martial Saint Tower became much quieter. Everyone watched the scene quietly, unable to say anything. Xian Zhong was a sage-to-be who had grasped the mysterious underworld law. No matter what, he was still a martial sage. Even if his battle prowess was not as great as a martial sage's, the difference was not too great. But now, he was actually killed by a young man of the same generation as them. The impact on them was too great. A shadow shot out from Xian Zhong's corpse and fled into the distance. Zhuan, remember this. I'll definitely report this to Martial Uncle Yan Ji and the others. I'll say that you betrayed your master and killed your own martial uncle. A vicious voice came from the shadow. However, the speed at which it fled was not slow at all. Instead, it was even faster. Escape? Do you think it's that easy? Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal, lock the heavens and lock the earth. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He flipped his right hand and the Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal shot out. Terrifying black chains extended out like countless black pythons and shot out. The chains were extremely fast. In an instant, they caught up with Xianzhong's nascent soul and bound it layer by layer, preventing it from escaping. Zhuowen retracted his right hand and the black chains disappeared into Zhuowen's pouch. At the same time, Xianzhong's nascent soul was also in his hand. Xianzhong's face was filled with fear. He struggled with all his might. Unfortunately, how could he break free from Zhuowen's restraint in his nascent soul form? You'd better stay in the spiritual ring first, Zhuowen said indifferently. He then stuffed Xianzhong's nascent soul into the spiritual ring. His gaze then fell on the martial sage, who was still attacking the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl not far away. At that moment, Zhuowen's face was slightly pale. The battle with Xianzhong had consumed a lot of his energy. Therefore, he immediately took out the Snow Lotus Jade Pill from the spiritual ring and consumed it. The surging medicinal power spread throughout his body. Zhuowen's injuries were alleviated by the medicinal power. Perhaps because he felt Zhuowen's gaze, the martial sage stopped his actions and stared at Zhuowen with fear. Zhuowen, I won't interfere in your matters. I'll let you leave the martial sage tower. However, you can't interfere in the young monk's matters. How about that? The martial sage spoke. There was a hint of submission in his words. The fact that Zhuowen could kill Xianzhong showed how terrifying the martial sage was. Although the martial sage had comprehended the law of martial and grasped a higher level of power than Xianzhong, he did not dare to say that he could kill Xianzhong. However, Zhuowen had done it. Therefore, the martial sage was extremely fearful. I'm sorry. I'm going to interfere. Zhuowen's lips curled into a smile. The purple lightning wings on his back spread out and he flew towards the martial sage as if he was teleporting. The martial sage's eyes narrowed. He waved his right hand and a mountain-like giant hand whistled through the air. Wherever it passed, the heavens collapsed and the earth cracked. Swoosh! Zhuowen entered the void and dodged the martial sage's attack. When he reappeared, he had already landed in the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. You know each other? Looking at the scene, the martial sage frowned and asked in surprise. Zhuowen and Zhuowen exchanged glances with one another and burst out laughing. They said at the same time, not only do we know each other, Zhuowen is Zhuowen and Zhuowen is Zhun. They are one. Saying this, Zhuowen took a step forward and emitted a bright glow, which merged with Zhuowen's actual body. At that instant, the two of them had merged into one. A clone! The martial sage's eyes widened as he mumbled to himself. Bang! As soon as Zhuowen merged with Zhuowen's body, a terrifying aura burst into the sky, as if it could shatter the space. Countless disciples of the martial saint tower knelt on the ground with one knee the moment the aura exploded. The aura was like the might of the heavens, suppressing them so much that they couldn't even stand up. How terrifying! Is this his strongest trump card? This was the thought in every disciple's mind. Their hearts trembled and their legs trembled. Xiao Yu was also stunned. He opened his mouth but did not know what to say. Zhuowen's strength had exceeded his expectations. Just now, it was already unbelievable that he could kill Xianzhong with the Ice Fire Palace. However, that was not his strongest move. Perhaps, Zhuowen now has the qualifications to compete with Yang Yi. In the 9 Underworld Conference 2 years later, he might be able to shine. Xiao Yu's eyes shone with a strange light. Zhuowen was only a 7th-rank martial emperor, but he was already so terrifying. Xiao Yu knew that if Zhuowen was given more time and comprehended the law of the void in the 9 Underworld Conference, Zhuowen might even surpass Yang Yi. The martial sage's face darkened. At this moment, Zhuowen's strength had exceeded his expectations. In fact, he was a little shocked. Martial sage, Leng Quan was killed by me. If you want to take revenge, come at me. Zhun walked step by step towards the martial sage. His thunderous voice exploded in the void. His battle intent surged. Fight! Although the martial sage was wary, he was fearless. The law of martial arts circled around the huge martial artist shadow. He clenched his right hand and a huge halberd appeared. After fusing with the power of the Buddhist scriptures, the shadow of an ancient Buddha that was thousands of feet tall appeared behind Zhuowen. The two collided in the void, and then an extremely terrifying explosion burst out, like countless firecrackers exploding. The illusory figure of the martial artist and the illusory figure of the ancient Buddha, the two giants, intertwined in the void. They fought in close combat, their fists landing on flesh. Every attack was able to leave cracks and cracks in the space above the void. Many people felt their scalps go numb as they watched. Amitabha, 10,000 Buddhas greeting sect. Zhuan shouted. The ancient Buddha shadow appeared in the void. Then, it split into many Buddha shadows. It was as if 10,000 Buddhas were worshipping it. Rumble. The 10,000 Buddhas slammed into the martial artist shadow. The latter's huge body was pushed back. Supreme Slaughter Dragon Seal. Zhuan didn't slow down. He used the Supreme Slaughter Dragon Seal again. The huge Supreme Slaughter Saint Dragon shadow followed closely behind the 10,000 Buddhas. Its huge dragon body was like a boundless whip. Bang! The martial artist shadow was pushed back again. Merciless slaughter! The phantom of the divine slaughter dragon roared and exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The terrifying power it generated spread out. The warrior's illusory figure was still retreating. Even the face of the martial sage within the warrior's illusory figure became somewhat pale. Ice Fire Palace. Zhuan stretched out his hands. The dark cold poison and 9 flames karmic fire slowly combined under his will, forming a huge ice fire palace. The ice fire palace pressed down like a mountain. It had an unbearable pressure. Rumble. The martial artist's illusory figure knelt on the ground with one knee. The entire ground shook violently and rumbled. The ice and fire palace crushed the martial artist's illusory figure, causing it to bend over and unable to stand up. Looking at this scene, many people's eyes were numb. In the battle between Zhuowen and the martial sage, it was the martial sage who was suppressed. Thump, thump, thump. The crisp sound of footsteps rang out as Zhuowen descended from the void. The ancient Buddha's shadow quietly floated behind him, its eyes narrowed. Zhuowen walked step by step towards the dim martial artist's shadow. The martial sage in the middle of the martial artist's shadow had a ghastly wound at the corner of his mouth. He kept coughing. In the battle just now, he had suffered extremely serious injuries. Martial sage, you brought this upon yourself. Zhuan came before the martial artist's shadow. After saying this, he pressed down with his right hand. The huge ancient Buddha shadow behind him stretched out a Buddha palm and slammed down on the martial artist's shadow. The martial sage roared. The martial artist's shadow shattered like glass. The martial sage fell to the ground in a sorry state. He struggled but couldn't get up. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Chapter 1399. Ice Soul Saint Physique. Zhuan isn't bad. His cultivation isn't high, but his battle prowess isn't bad. Above the clouds of the martial saint tower, 3 majestic figures floated silently. The 3 of them were white-haired old men in long robes. If one was here, he would definitely recognize them as the 3 saints of the inner yard, Yanji, Jiangxian, and Wenbai. Senior brother Yanji, the ice and fire palace Zhuan used just now is similar to the ice and fire dual polarity palace, and his method seems to be. Jiangxian suddenly looked at Yanji and said hesitantly. Yanji's expression was very calm as he said indifferently, Junior brother Jiang, I know what you want to say. Zhuowen's method of merging ice and fire energy is indeed a characteristic of the ice-fire Saint Rune. Could it be? Jiangxian's pupils shrank slightly as he exclaimed. After Zhuowen left the ice and fire dual polarity palace, I went inside again. The ice-fire Saint Rune on the 18th floor no longer exists, Yanji said calmly. In other words, Yun obtained the ice-fire Saint Rune? Wenbai said with narrowed eyes. Yanji nodded and said, I'm afraid so. Zhuan used some unknown method to subdue the Ice-Fire Saint Rune. It's truly unbelievable. Senior brother Yanji, what should we do? The Ice-Fire Saint Rune is the origin of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. If Zhuan took it away, the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace will not be able to fulfill the purpose of the trial in the future, Jiang Xian said with some displeasure. It's fine. Yanji waved his hand and continued. This little guy left half of the Ice-Fire Saint Rune's origin in the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. It's enough to keep the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace running. Also, don't forget what the progenitor said. The Ice-Fire Saint Rune can only be obtained by the Fated One. We all tried to subdue the Ice-Fire Saint Rune, but none of us succeeded. Unfortunately, Zhuan succeeded. So the Fated One the progenitor spoke of should be Zhuan. Why should we take back the Ice-Fire Saint Rune? Jiang Xian and Wenbai exchanged glances, then looked at Yanji and asked, Senior brother, what do you mean? Go back and support Ao Yuan Peak, and I also need to talk to this little guy. Senior brother, Yuan also killed Xian Zhong. Should we deal with him according to the sect's rules? Wenbai suddenly asked. Yanji smiled faintly and said, because Xian Zhong was dissatisfied with a junior, he made a move to kill Zhuan. This is treason and deserves to be killed. Jiang Xian and Wenbai's hearts trembled when they heard this. The two of them knew that Yanji intended to cover up the matter of Zhuan killing Xian Zhong. However, the two of them understood after giving it some thought. Xian Zhong was already dead, but Zhuan was still alive. Moreover, he was a peerless genius with unlimited potential. It was impossible for them to force away a monster like Zhuan because of a dead person. On the contrary, they would treat Zhuan well and let Zhuan feel a sense of belonging to the Divine Academy. Let's go back first. When Zhuan returns to the inner courtyard, I will personally talk to him, Yanji said faintly. Jiang Xian and Wenbai nodded. Then, the three of them disappeared into the clouds like smoke. On the wasteland, the martial saint clenched his fists and stared at Zhuan, who was walking over step by step. His eyes were filled with fear. He was the strongest person in the martial saint tower, the martial saint. At this moment, he had lost to a junior. He could not accept this. Martial saint, you protected your disciple, Lung Quan, and then went back on your words. In the end, you even colluded with Xian Zhong to kill me. Today you have lost. What else do you have to say? Arriving in front of the martial saint, Zhuan looked down at the man who was kneeling on one knee on the ground. I have nothing to say. However, isn't it too early for you to kill me? Although I have lost, it won't be that easy for you to kill me. The martial saint suddenly laughed out loud. He punched the ground with his right fist and the law of martial poured out. Instantly, the ground where Zhuan and the martial saint were standing cracked. A terrifying pressure surged from below, wanting to strangle Zhuan to death. You really don't want to give up? Zhuan shook his head. His right eye suddenly opened and closed. At this moment his right eye was filled with ice-blue cold air. It surged and contained the powerful law of ice. Ice seal, Zhuan said softly, and the cracked ground under his feet completely froze. The surging pressure also came to a sudden stop. Law of ice? You actually have a law of martial saint in your body? How is this possible? The martial saint shrieked. His face was filled with disbelief. However, his shriek did not last for long. A spear pierced through the air and instantly arrived. Block! The martial saint furiously roared. He raised his hands and the law of martial saint turned into a wall, blocking in front of him. Gotcha! However, the wall formed by the law of martial saint was like paper. It instantly shattered and the spear pierced through the martial saint's chest like a hot knife through butter. Poochie! The martial saint spat out a mouthful of blood. His gaze landed on the spear on his body. Only then did he discover that on the surface of the spear, the law of ice and the law of fire were unceasingly interweaving. It is indeed two law of martial saint. No wonder it could easily pierce through the wall formed by my law of martial saint. After saying that, the martial saint knelt on the ground. His eyes gradually closed and his aura gradually faded away. The law of ice and the law of fire were originally very ordinary law of martial saint. However, when the two laws were combined, their might could completely surpass that of higher-level laws. Zhuan held the spear with his right hand and suddenly pulled it out. He brought out a strand of blood. Then, he extended his right hand into the martial saint's dantian. With a frown, he discovered that the martial saint's nascent soul had been completely destroyed. It seemed that the power of the law of ice and the law of fire was too berserk. It had directly destroyed all of the martial saint's vitality. Even his nascent soul had not survived. Xiao Yu's figure flashed and arrived beside Zhuan. He stared at the martial saint weakly on the ground with a complicated gaze. He lightly sighed and said, "I'm afraid that the martial saint tower will truly decline from now on. However, this is their own fault." Zhuan shook his head and said indifferently. After saying that, Zhuowen's gaze landed on Lu Hantian and said, "Big brother Hantian, do you know why the martial saint wanted to capture you?" Zhuan had heard the conversation between the martial saint and Xian Zhong very clearly. It seemed that Lu Hantian had a special physique that could help the martial saint break through the shackles and become a saint. Lu Hantian revealed a blank expression. He bitterly smiled and said, "Actually, I'm also a little confused. Originally, I planned to wholeheartedly cultivate after joining the martial saint tower. More than 10 days ago, Lung Quan came to find me and brought me to a room. Then, I was mysteriously labeled with the crime of molesting the martial saint tower's young miss. From then on, I was wanted by the martial saint tower. Oh, that's right, after I was captured, I was brought to the martial saint's residence. I vaguely heard the martial saint mention something about the sacred frost physique. However, I don't know what the sacred frost physique is." When these words came out, Xiao Yu's pupils shrank. He could not help but say excitedly, "Sacred frost physique? It seems that your friend is very likely to have the sacred frost physique. Otherwise, the martial saint would not be so anxious to capture him." After saying that, Xiao Yu arrived in front of Lu Hantian and grabbed Lu Hantian's right hand. However, his brows were slightly furrowed. "Old man Xiao, what's wrong? Is there a problem with big brother Hantian?" Zhuan asked with slight worry. Xiao Yu's eyes flickered and said, "Your friend indeed has the sacred frost physique. However, the frost soul origin in his body has been sealed. I'm afraid it was done by the martial saint. Moreover, only a saint can undo the seal. If you want to help your friend undo the seal, you can only ask martial uncle Yanji and the others. Wait, can you tell me in detail what the sacred frost physique is?" Lu Hantian suddenly asked. The so-called sacred frost physique is a special physique that has the frost soul origin in his body. Martial artists with the sacred frost physique have great potential. It is much easier for them to break through to the saint realm compared to ordinary martial artists. There are almost no shackles. Moreover, because of the frost soul origin in his body, he does not need to comprehend the laws. He can naturally control the frost soul origin when he is at the high-level martial emperor realm, Xiao Yu said seriously. So I am so awesome. Why didn't I realize it before?" Lu Hantian touched his chin and revealed a narcissistic smile. "I didn't expect big brother Hantian to have the sacred frost physique. Congratulations. By the way, where are Luo Xing, Qing Lian, and LV Tao?" Huan cupped his hands. He was happy for Lu Hantian. "The three of them accompanied me for a while before leaving the 9th Netherworld realm. They plan to return to your Black Dragon Empire. The three of them know that they are not talented enough. The Emperor realm is their limit, so, at this point, Lu Hantian sighed softly. His tone was full of sorrow. The path of martial arts has always been like this. If you do not advance, you will fall behind. Moreover, it is very important to have talent and opportunity. If you do not have both, you will be eliminated in the end. Even if you have too many resources, if your talent is not high, you will not be able to raise your cultivation too high no matter how many resources you have. Perhaps the Black Dragon Empire is more suitable for the three of them." Zhuan sighed softly. For a moment, the two of them fell into silence. "There is nothing to do here. Let's go back to the academy first." Xiao Yu suddenly said to Zhuan. "Yes, let's go." Zhuan nodded. Soon after, the three of them left the martial saint tower. "It's over. The Martial Saint Tower is done for. Big senior brother is dead. Even the Martial Saint is dead. What should we do? I have heard of Jun. It is said that he is the direct disciple of Ao Yuan Peak. I did not expect his strength to be so terrifying. We must not provoke such a fiend in the future. After the three of them left, many disciples of the Martial Saint Tower were at a loss of what to do. They were in an uproar and did not know what to do. From today onwards, Zhuowen's name would spread throughout the entire divine netherworld realm. With the death of the Martial Saint and Lung Quan, the Martial Saint Tower was destined to decline and even disband. The one who caused all of this was a 7th-level Emperor Realm Youth. This might seem unbelievable to many people, but it had indeed happened. Sush, sush, sush. In front of the mountain gate of Jiashan College, 3 figures came one after another. It was Zhuowen and the other 2 who were returning. Chapter 1400. Talk in detail. After returning to the inner court, Zhuowen found that everywhere he went, the gazes of many disciples looking at him became extremely strange. There were even quite a few people who pointed at him and whispered. Seeing the actions of the surrounding disciples, Zhuowen frowned. He was filled with doubts, but he could not say what he was thinking. After arriving at the bottom of the 9 peaks, a beautiful figure quietly stood there, like a snow lotus that stood alone in the world. This beautiful figure slowly turned around and her beautiful eyes fell onto Zhuowen, revealing a sweet smile. Zhuowen also grinned and quickly walked over, tightly hugging this beautiful figure. After the 2 of them separated, Mu Chenxue bowed to Lu Hantian and said, Chenxue greets Senior Hantian. Thank you Senior Han-Tian for taking care of Zhuowen in the past. Lu Han-Tian waved his hand and said, In is my brother. In the past he was weak, so I should take care of him. Now that this brat is much stronger than me, he should take care of me. After saying this, Lu Han-Tian smiled as he stared at Zhuowen and Mu Chenxue, and said, However, what I want to know more is, when will the 2 of you get married? I'm still waiting for your wedding banquet. When these words came out, Mu Chenxue lowered her head and her cheeks flushed red. Zhuowen rubbed his nose and revealed an awkward look. You 2 don't need to waste time. Hurry up and get married. It's best if you give birth to a white and chubby baby. When the time comes, how about you acknowledge me as your godfather? Lu Han-Tian said in a carefree manner. Big brother Han-Tian, let's talk about this in the future. I will definitely do this. After saying this, Zhuowen's right hand tightly held Mu Chenxue's jade-like hand, his eyes filled with love. Perhaps because she saw the doting look in Zhuowen's eyes, Mu Chenxue's cheeks became even redder. She said in a low voice, I believe you. However, what Zhuowen did not notice was that the moment Mu Chenxue lowered her head, a trace of sadness appeared in her eyes. Of course, this trace of emotion only appeared for a moment. Chenxue, how did you know that I would come back today? Zhuowen asked in a rather doubtful voice. Mu Chenxue smiled and said, It was Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji who said that you would return today. That's why I waited for you at the bottom of the 9 peaks in advance. Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji? Zhuowen was startled and asked in surprise. Perhaps Zhuowen doesn't know that Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji has already announced the death of Grand Marshal Uncle Xianzhong to the entire 9 peaks of the inner court. Now, everyone in the inner court knows that Grand Marshal Uncle Xianzhong has fallen. Mu Chenxue suddenly said in a soft voice. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. Since Yan Ji knew that Xianzhong was dead, he was probably near the Martial Saint Tower and had seen the scene of his battle with Xianzhong. Zhuowen frowned. Xianzhong was one of the 9 peak masters after all. He was an upper echelon of the inner court and an extremely important figure. He did not know what Yan Ji thought of him killing Xianzhong. Thinking of this, Zhuowen felt slightly uneasy. Perhaps sensing Zhuowen's expression, Mu Chenxue said with a faint smile, Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji has no intention of blaming you. This time, he has already made the matter public and explained everything clearly. It was Xianzhong who launched a sneak attack on you and wanted to kill you first. You killed Grand Marshal Uncle Xianzhong in self-defense. Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji has no intention of blaming you. Zhuowen revealed a surprised expression when he heard this. He did not expect that not only would Yan Ji make this matter public, he would even speak in a rare manner of protecting him. At the same time, Zhuan also recalled the scene of the other disciples pointing at him after he entered the academy. Those disciples were probably pointing at him because Yan Ji had made the matter public. After all, as a member of the younger generation, killing a powerful half-saint like Xianzhong was an extremely shocking matter. Coupled with the fact that Xianzhong was Zhuowen's grand martial uncle, Zhuan naturally became the center of attention. Zhuan, Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji has instructed me to ask you to find him. Mu Chenxue suddenly said to Zhuowen. Where is Grand Marshal Uncle Yan Ji? Zhuowen asked. In the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Hall. Mu Chenxue answered. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. Yan Ji had chosen the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Hall as the meeting place. All right, I will go and meet him. Zhuowen nodded. Soon after, the group walked towards the top of Aoyuan Peak. After arriving at the peak, Yuan led Lu Hantian along the chain at the edge of the cliff and flew towards the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Hall in the middle of the void. At this moment, the door of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Hall was open. Zhuan did not take too long to enter the hall. Zhuan, come to the 18th level. A majestic voice exploded beside Zhuowen's ear like thunder the moment he entered the Ice-Fire Dual Extreme Hall. Zhuowen's eyes immediately darkened. He knew that Yan Ji should know that he had already taken the Ice-Fire Sacred Rune from the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Hall. Zhuowen's first thought was to escape. However, his rationality told him that it was impossible. Yan Ji was the second terrifying expert in the 9 Netherworld realm to become a heavenly saint. In the hands of such an existence, Zhuan would be dreaming if he wanted to escape. I can only brace myself and go up. With a soft sigh, the Ice-Fire Sacred Rune appeared in Zhuowen's eyes. Immediately, the surrounding ice and fire energy gathered into an ice and fire dragon. Zhuan led Lu Hantian onto the ice and fire dragon. The two of them passed through the first 17 levels like a hot knife through butter and entered the 18th level. On the 18th level, Yan Ji sat cross-legged quietly. When Zhuan and Lu Hantian arrived, he slowly opened his eyes and smiled. Zhuan, I have been waiting for you for a few days. Zhuan scratched his head and pretended to be deaf. I don't know what senior uncle means. Yan Ji was not angry. He said indifferently, you don't have to play dumb. The Ice-Fire Sacred Rune should be on you. Don't try to fool me. I have seen your battle in the Martial Saint Tower. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of a sharp glint. He was secretly on guard in his heart. He did not expect Yan Ji to be so direct as soon as he came up, causing Zhuowen to be rather unaccustomed to it. Then what does senior uncle mean? Zhuowen asked in a deep voice. Yan Ji smiled. Actually, it's nothing. Don't worry, I will not take the Ice-Fire Sacred Rune. It is your opportunity and should belong to you. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of suspicion when he heard Yan Ji's words. He did not expect Yan Ji to be so easy to talk to. You don't have to doubt me. To be able to obtain the Ice-Fire Sacred Rune, you need an opportunity. If the three of us could obtain it, we would have taken it long ago. Yan Ji's eyes fell on Lu Hantian as he spoke. He sized him up and suddenly became serious as he stared at the latter. What do you want? I'm not interested in you. Don't stare at me like that. Lu Hantian was a little scared by Yan Ji's stare. He rubbed his arms with his hands, and his hair stood on end as he cursed. Yan Ji did not mind. He laughed and said, Saint Body of Frost? I didn't notice it before. My eyes are really bad. Yan Ji hooked his right hand as he spoke. A terrifying saint energy surrounded Lu Hantian, causing the Lu Hantian to involuntarily fly towards Yan Ji. Damn, I'm a normal man. What do you want? Let go of me. Lu Hantian wailed like a ghost and howled like a wolf. He wanted to get rid of Yan Ji's saint energy, but it was useless. In front of Yan Ji, Lu Hantian was like a newborn baby. No matter how he struggled, he could not get rid of Yan Ji's power. Zhuowen was shocked. Yan Ji's power was too great. Even his legs were trembling on the spot, and he could not move at all. Is this the power of a saint? Isn't it much stronger than a half-saint? Zhuowen's body trembled. He knew very well that with the power that Yanji had shown, he could kill him with just a thought. Yanji pressed Lu Hantian's shoulder and stared at the latter very carefully. It was as if he was looking at a piece of peerless jade. Lu Hantian trembled. It was as if 10,000 alpacas were galloping in his heart. He was still an old virgin. How could he be defiled by this old man in front of him? He absolutely could not allow it. Old man, let me tell you. You can only get my body. You can't get my heart. Even if you use force, it's useless. You'd better let me go. Lu Hantian said righteously. Zhuan, who was standing behind, suddenly held his forehead. He felt that he had lost all his face because of Lu Hantian. Yanji did not pay attention to Lu Hantian. He looked at Lu Hantian from head to toe and said indifferently, "It really is the saint body of frost. It's just that the frost origin in your body has been sealed a second time." Sealed a second time? Yuan narrowed his eyes and said with some surprise. Xiao Yu had said before that the frost origin in Lu Hantian's body had been sealed once by the martial saint. In theory, it should only have been sealed once. Now, Yanji said that it had been sealed a second time. It seemed that before becoming a martial saint, Lu Hantian's frost origin had been sealed once. Martial artists with the saint body of frost have very high talent and their promotion speed is very fast. However, although Lu Hantian's talent is not bad, his promotion speed is not fast. I'm afraid that the frost origin in his body had been sealed a long time ago. In his mind, Xiao Hei's voice slowly sounded. Zhuan narrowed his eyes. Who had sealed Lu Hantian's frost origin? It's the blood demon. Zhuan's eyes lit up. Lu Hantian's genius name had once shaken the entire Qing Xian Empire. Later, because of the blood demon, he had been sealed in the blood demon's inheritance. The frost origin in his body must have been sealed by the blood demon. After all, the blood demon's vision was much sharper than the average person. At that time, if Lu Hantian's frost origin had not been sealed and allowed to cultivate, it would have been disadvantageous to the blood demon. This is a good seedling. Yanji's lips curled into a smile. Immediately, a surge of saint energy gushed out from his palm and drilled into Lu Hantian's body. Puchi! Lu Hantian violently spat out a mouthful of blood. This blood was faintly pitch black. You pervert, what did you do to me? After escaping from Yanji's control, Lu Hantian continuously retreated. He looked at Yanji with an extremely unhappy gaze. Take a look. Don't you feel much better? Your affinity with the surrounding Yuan Qi is much higher than before? Yanji said lightly. Chapter 1401. SS Phoenix Phantom. This. Lu Hantian's eyes narrowed, especially when he felt his meridians clear and comfortable. His meridians were circulating several times or even dozens of times faster than usual. His lips curled into an overjoyed smile. Little guy, how about becoming my disciple? I'll help you become a saint in a short time. Yanji stared at Lu Hantian with shining eyes. Although Lu Hantian had lived for almost 100 years, Yanji was a saint. He must have lived for thousands of years. Calling Lu Hantian a little guy was not too much. Lu Hantian was stunned, but Dun was overjoyed. He said to Lu Hantian, Big brother Hantian, why don't you agree? Yanji was the ruler of the divine specter realm. His cultivation had reached the heavenly saint realm. If Lu Hantian could become his disciple, it would undoubtedly be a blessing. Lu Hantian realized it late, but he also knew that Yanji was extraordinary. He hurriedly bowed and said, Disciple greets master. Yanji nodded. Lu Hantian had the ice soul saint physique. He was destined to become a saint. Yanji was naturally happy to be able to accept such a genius. I say, master, why don't you take Shuowen in as well? His talent and strength are even stronger than mine. With your guidance, he'll definitely become a saint soon, Lu Hantian said with a grin. Yanji was stunned. Then he shook his head and said, You're different. Zhuowen's talent is indeed very strong, but I can't teach him. I can't even guarantee that he can become a saint. But Lu Hantian asked with wide eyes. Because Zhun is a dragon soul cultivator, and his dragon soul is an existence like the Abyss Saint Dragon. As he spoke, Yanji suddenly looked at Zhuowen and asked, Hyun, was it extremely difficult for you to break through to the Emperor realm? Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. Soon after, he smiled bitterly and said, It is indeed quite difficult. Your dragon soul origin is too strong. Breaking through a major realm requires a lot of energy. It's much more difficult for you to break through to the Imperial Power realm than for ordinary warriors. Then, the Pilgrimage realm will only be more difficult than the Imperial Power realm, and much more difficult. Of course, once you break through, your strength will become extremely terrifying. Ordinary profound sages won't be your opponent at all. At this point, Yanji quietly stared at Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen's talent and strength might be even more terrifying than Lu Hantian's, whether or not he could become a saint was still unknown. After all, becoming a saint was not a child's play. Even those geniuses who had shown great talent in the early stages would pale in comparison to becoming a saint. On top of that, Zhuowen had Xiao He with him. It would be even more difficult for him to become a martial saint than for ordinary martial artists. This was also the reason why Yanji was willing to accept Lu Hantian as his disciple but not Zhuowen. After all, so what if Zhuowen's talent was strong? If he couldn't become a saint, he wouldn't be of much use. Zhuowen fell silent. Although Yanji's words were not pleasant to hear, they were indeed the truth. When he broke through to the Imperial Power realm, Zhuowen had already guessed that it would be much more difficult for him to break through in the future than for ordinary warriors. Regarding this, he was also mentally prepared. Zhuowen suddenly smiled and said, Although becoming a saint is much more difficult than becoming an ordinary warrior, there's still a chance, isn't there? Looking at Zhuowen's tenacious smile, Yanji's eyes narrowed, and a trace of emotion appeared in his heart. Lu Hantian smiled flatteringly and said, Master, even if you don't accept Zhuowen as your disciple, you should at least give him some pointers, right? Yanji smiled and said, Of course. After all, Zhuowen is also a member of the inner court. Moreover, Zhuowen is also the person in the inner court who has the highest chance of comprehending the law of void. I hope you won't disappoint me. Senior Uncle Yanji, don't worry. I will definitely do my best in this matter, Zhuowen said respectfully. It's good that you have this intention. Remember, you will always be a member of the excellent Divine College. Our college is willing to shelter you from the wind and rain, but at the same time, we hope that you can contribute to the college, Yanji said with a smile. Of course. Zhuowen bowed, and his heart trembled slightly. He knew that Yanji was probably talking about the holy ice-fire symbol on him. After all, Yanji did not take back the holy ice-fire symbol on him. Clearly, he was planning to do him a huge favor. If he could reach the peak of the martial way in the future, he could take care of the excellent Divine College. Of course, even if Yanji did not say so, Zhuowen would have done so. After all, the holy ice-fire symbol belonged to the inner court. He was not a selfish person and naturally knew how to be grateful. Also, I have already completely resolved the matter of Xianzhong for you. You don't have to worry at all, Yanji continued. Zhuowen nodded. Mu Chenxue had already told him about Xianzhong's matter. Although he had killed Xianzhong, Yanji did not have the slightest intention of blaming him. The 9 Netherworld Conference is about to begin. Tun, go back and properly comprehend the laws of void. If you can completely comprehend the laws of void before the 9 Netherworld Conference, your strength will rise to a whole new level, Yanji said with a smile. Disciple understands, Zhuowen said. Then let's go out. I need to properly train Hantian. Before the 9 Underworld Conference, this kid must at least grasp the Ice Soul Law. As he spoke, Yanji lifted Lu Hantian with one hand, and like a great rock spreading its wings, he instantly disappeared from the ice and fire dual polarity palace. Zhuowen's eyes flickered and he muttered, This time, Big Brother Hantian's fortune is coming. I wonder how strong he will be when we meet again in the 9 Underworld Conference? I'm really looking forward to it. As he spoke, Zhuowen disappeared from the ice and fire dual polarity palace. After walking out of the ice and fire dual polarity palace, Zhuowen immediately saw a slender and elegant figure standing at the entrance of the palace. Chenxue. Zhuowen softly called out. That beautiful figure slowly turned around and gave a sweet smile to Zhuan. Moreover, her smile was extremely bright. Without knowing why, when Zhuan saw the bright smile on Mu Qinshue's face, he frowned, and a bad premonition arose in his heart. He kept feeling that there was sadness behind Mu Qinshue's smile. Mu Qinshu was like the wind, and she threw herself into Zhuan's embrace. The two of them did not speak as they quietly stood at the entrance of the palace. Zhuan's heart trembled. He discovered that the current Mu Qinshu was actually trembling. "Qinshu, what's wrong?" Zhuan asked in astonishment. "I'm cold. Hold me tight." "Will you hold me tight forever?" Mu Qinshu said softly. Zhuan's arms tightly hugged her, and he said in a gentle voice, "Don't worry, I will hold you tight forever." Mu Qinshu gently nodded. She rested her head in Zhuan's embrace, as if she was quietly listening to the latter's breathing. "How good would it be if we continued like this forever? How good would it be if we continued like this forever?" Mu Qinshu softly muttered. "Yes, we will be together forever, forever," Zhuan said with a smile. After a long while, the two of them separated. Mu Qinshu pulled Zhuan's arm and said, "Will you accompany me tonight?" Zhuan was stunned, then he nodded and said, "All right, I'll accompany you." As night fell, it was like a black dragon pressing down, covering the sky and the sun. The stars in the sky were sparse. Sky capital peak, floating snow pavilion. The dim light continued to flicker. In the pavilion, two figures were quietly hugging. Mu Qinshu leaned on Zhuan and said in a gentle voice, "Yin, I want to hear a story. Tell me the story of Wu Senge and Chen Yuanyuan." "All right." Zhuan tightly hugged Mu Qinshu and slowly said, "Shanghai Pass's commander Wu Senge, because Chen Yuanyuan was taken away by Lu Zongmin, he flew into a rage and refused to surrender to Li Zicheng, leading the Qing army into the pass." Zhuan quietly spoke, and Mu Qinshu quietly listened. Under the flickering light, the two figures were faintly discernible. When Zhuan's voice fell, Mu Qinshu suddenly stuck to Zhuan's body. Then, her cherry-red lips pressed against Zhuan's lips. Zhuan's movement stiffened. He did not expect Mu Qinshu to be so proactive today. However, he did not reject her. His hands wrapped around her waist that was as soft as a water snake, and he passionately responded to the latter. Under the dim light, a charming atmosphere spread out. Under the illumination of the light, the two figures continuously intertwined, blending together like water and milk. What Zhuan did not know was that under the light in the pavilion, there was a faint wisp of purple gas spreading. A delicate fragrance spread out, with an intoxicating smell. In the early morning, in the floating snow pavilion, a beautiful figure slowly stood up. Under the dim light of the morning, her jade-white back was exceptionally dazzling, like the highest grade of mutton fat jade. Mu Qinshu stretched out her jade-like hand, and a scarlet satin robe flew out from her spiritual ring and draped over her body. Then, she came to the dressing table and quietly tidied herself up. Her fine hair was coiled up, and light makeup was always appropriate. After doing all this, Mu Qinshu came to the bed in the middle. She gently squatted down and stared at the youth who was sleeping soundly before her. She stared straight at him, as if she wanted to deeply imprint his face in her mind. "Then, I love you. I've always loved you." Mu Qinshu revealed a sad smile. She bent down and lightly kissed Zhuan's face like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. After doing all this, Mu Qinshu's eyes revealed traces of coldness. Then she walked out of the floating snow pavilion. At this moment, the atmosphere in the sky capital peak was extremely solemn. Old Man Tiandu, Yang Yi, Jian Mu, and even the other 8 peak masters had all come. Not only that, even the 3 saints of the inner court, Yan Ji and the other 2, had all gathered in the sky capital peak, as if they were welcoming an important guest. "Qin Shui, you? What about Zhuan?" Xiao Yu suddenly came before Mu Qinshu, his eyes filled with a complicated expression. Mu Qinshu softly sighed and said, "You also know the rules of the Burning Heaven sect. The saintess can only stay in the inner court for 5 years. Now that the 5 years are up, she must return to the southern wilderness." Xiao Yu still wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by a terrifying rumbling sound. In the distant horizon, a boundless sea of fire spread over. If one looked carefully, one would see an enormous flaming bird shuttling through the sea of fire, stepping on the sea of fire. Even if it was extremely far away, the heat wave that rushed over made many inner court disciples feel hot all over. The phoenix silhouette of the Burning Heaven sect. It looks like the Burning Heaven sect has sent an extraordinary person this time. Yenji's eyes narrowed and his voice was filled with solemnity. The phoenix silhouette could only be grasped by the upper echelons of the Burning Heaven sect. Chapter 1402. Smoke like fire squeak. The sharp screeching sound pierced through metal and cracked rocks as it shot straight into the clouds. It shook the eardrums of many inner academy disciples to the point that their eardrums hurt, while their eyes revealed a shocked expression. The phoenix shadow was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the huge shadow that was originally in the sky had already arrived above Capital Sky Peak. Then, the disciples of the inner court saw over a dozen figures standing quietly on the phoenix's back. The one leading them was an old man in a fiery red robe. Blazing flames burned in the old man's eyes, and terrifying laws of fire intertwined around his body. It was worth noting that the laws of fire on the old man's body were much stronger than Xiao Yu's. If the two of them were to fight, Xiao Yu would not be able to withstand a single blow from the old man. Yenji's gaze fell on the old man, and he frowned slightly. He could not help but say, "Elder Raiwa, I didn't expect Zhou Tianzong to send you to welcome junior nephew Qin Shui." Elder Raiwa narrowed his eyes and looked at Yenji. His expression became serious as he frowned. "Yenji, I didn't expect you to break through before me. The Eastern Lands has finally produced a second heavenly saint powerhouse. I was just lucky. I've only just entered the Sky in Saint realm," Yenji said with a faint smile. Perhaps because he discovered that Yenji was a heavenly saint, Elder Raiwa's expression became much more serious. A heavenly saint was much stronger than a profound saint. Elder Raiwa waved his hand and said, "Brother Yen is too humble. In the entire heavenly armor continent, other than the central lands, there are billions of beings in the other four plates. But the number of heavenly saints that can be born can be counted on one hand. Brother Yen, since you're able to become a heavenly saint, even if it's just the Sky in Saint realm, you're already standing at the peak of the Eastern Lands. At the very least, I have to look up to Raiwa," Elder Raiwa said politely. "Brother Raiwa, you're too polite. You've already reached the fragmentary saint realm of the 5 profound saints and are only a step away from becoming a heavenly saint. I'm afraid that you'll be able to break through to the heavenly saint realm in the future," Yenji said with a smile. Raiwa shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Brother Yen, you're worrying too much. I've already lived for thousands of years, and I've been stuck in the fragmentary saint realm for nearly 1,000 years. My chances of breaking through..." Yenji did not answer. He knew that martial artists who could cultivate to the pilgrimage realm were all prodigies blessed by the heavens. However, the pilgrimage realm was as deep as the ocean. Even if it was just a minor realm in the pilgrimage realm, the difficulty of advancing was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Yenji had stayed in the profound sage realm for 1,000 years before he managed to break through and become a heavenly sage by chance. One had to know that the lifespan of a saint was extremely long, at least hundreds of thousands of years. To be able to become a saint within 1,000 years was already considered a genius, and to be able to become a saint within 100 years was already considered a monster. Of course, monstrous geniuses were rare. At least in a place like the Eastern Lands, such a monstrous genius had never appeared before. Beside Elder Raiwa, a young man in red clothes with a flame pattern on his forehead stepped out and landed on Sky Capital Peak. With a smile on his face, he walked towards Mu Chenshue step by step. "He is..." Yenji's eyes fell on the young man and asked curiously. He's the holy son of my Burning Heaven sect, Yen Ruhua. He came with me this time to welcome Saintess Mu Chenshue back to the sect," Elder Raiwa said with a smile. "Holy son?" Yenji narrowed his eyes. Yen Ruhua's aura was very powerful and terrifying. He was probably comparable to Qing Longzi of the Blue Dragon Hall. He even faintly felt that Yen Ruhua was hiding his true strength. Chen Shui, how have you been in the Eastern Land for the past 5 years? I heard that you found someone you like here? Yen Ruhua came in front of Mu Chenxue and asked with a smile. Mu Chenxue frowned and said indifferently, "This has nothing to do with you. Who did you hear it from?" Yen Ruhua smiled evilly and said, "Elder Chiu. Who else could it be?" Mu Chenxue's pupils shrank and her face changed. "Elder Chiu? What did you do to him?" Mu Chenxue knew Elder Chiu's character very well. He was absolutely loyal to her and would never tell Yen Ruhua about this. Combined with Yen Ruhua's usual style, she was afraid that the latter had used some kind of torture to force Elder Chiu. "What else can I do? I just looked at the old man's memories." "Oh, I heard that the person you like is called Zhuowen, right? I heard that he also came to Jiaxin Academy. Where is he? Let me take a look." Yen Ruhua said without any care. Mu Chenxue's face turned dark. Yen Ruhua's words were very calm, but she knew that with the latter's methods, Yen Ruhua must have searched Elder Chiu's soul. The side effect of searching his soul was very large. If she wasn't careful, Elder Chiu might— "Oh, that's right. Elder Chiu has gone crazy. When I searched his soul, I wasn't paying attention and destroyed his sea of consciousness." Yen Ruhua suddenly said with a teasing smile. "Bastard!" Mu Chenxue's body trembled. She gave a delicate roar and flames burst out from her body. Her jade-like hand reached out and attacked Yen Ruhua. Yen Ruhua's smile became even wider. Her right hand reached out and grabbed Mu Chenxue's right hand. She said with a smile, "Chen Shui, why are you so angry? You're just a useless servant. You bastard, you'll die a horrible death." Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes were filled with mist. Elder Chiu had followed her for a long time and had a very good relationship with her. Ever since she joined the Fine Theology Institute, Elder Chiu had been reporting to the Burning Heaven sect. She never thought that Yen Ruhua would search his soul and destroy his sea of consciousness, turning him into an idiot. Mu Chenxue was very clear that with Yen Ruhua's cultivation, there shouldn't be any mistakes in searching his soul. However, Elder Chiu's sea of consciousness had been destroyed. It was obvious that Yen Ruhua had done it deliberately. Boom! A sonic boom suddenly came from behind Yen Ruhua. A terrifying temperature rose, causing Yen Ruhua to frown. Her empty left hand suddenly smashed behind her. Boom! An ear-piercing explosion resounded. The two powers of law collided and swept up a violent hurricane. Yen Ruhua was as still as a mountain, but the figure behind her groaned and retreated several steps. "What is the meaning of this? Sneak attacking me?" Yen Ruhua tilted her head and stared at Xiao Yu behind her. Her voice was cold. Xiao Yu's face was a little ugly. Yen Ruhua was actually this strong, forcing him back in a single move. This made him both shocked and angry. "Chen Shui is still a disciple of our institute. Aren't you a little too arrogant to act so recklessly in our Fine Theology Institute?" Xiao Yu took a deep breath and coldly said, Huh? You're saying that I'm acting recklessly? Chen Shui is our Burning Heaven sect's saintess. She only came to your institute to train. You really think that she's a disciple of your institute? What a joke!" Yen Ruhua sneered. "Ruhua, let Chen Shui go." Elder Raiwa finally opened her mouth and calmly said. Yen Ruhua's face froze. She nodded and released Mu Chenxue, saying, "Chen Shui, your cultivation progress is very slow. You're only in the 9th layer of the Emperor realm and you haven't comprehended the power of law. Fine Theology Institute isn't that great. Returning to the Burning Heaven sect is a wise choice. I don't need you to care about my matters." Mu Chenxue coldly glanced at Yen Ruhua, then walked over to Old Man Tian Du, Yang Yi, Jian Mu, and Feng Yanlan. "Master, Senior Brother Yang Yi, Senior Brother Jian Mu, and Senior Sister Feng Yanlan, thank you for taking care of me these past few years. Chen Shui will be leaving today." After saying this, Mu Chenxue bowed, her beautiful eyes filled with gratitude. "Junior Sister Chen Shui, be careful. You can always contact me when you return to the Burning Heaven sect." Feng Yanlan stepped forward and held Mu Chenxue's hands as she said this. Old Man Tian Du softly sighed. "Chen Shui, Master is not talented and can't teach you too much. I hope that after you return to the Burning Heaven sect, you can rise step by step. Master, there's no need to belittle yourself. The days in Sky Capital Peak are very free and very happy. I like it very much, Mu Chenxue said with a smile. Yang Yi leaned against the stone pillar and looked at Mu Chenxue. His eyes sparkled and he rarely said, Junior Sister Chenxue, take care. Jian Mu, on the other hand, was like a sharp sword as he stood where he was. Ruthlessness lingered in his eyes as he quietly stared at Mu Chenxue without saying a word. Goodbye. Mu Chenxue revealed a sweet smile. Her eyes looked through the void and fell onto the floating snow pavilion. Inside, there were the people she cared about, the people she loved. Goodbye. Mu Chenxue softly muttered as she reluctantly withdrew her gaze. With a kick of her jade-like feet, she leapt onto the back of the phoenix silhouette. Young Miss Chenxue, the sect master has been waiting for you in the sect for a long time. Now that you can return to the sect, I'm afraid the sect master will be very happy. Elder Raiwa said to Mu Chenxue with a smile. Mu Chenxue expressionlessly nodded, not saying a word. Yen Ruhua also jumped up and landed on the Phoenix Phantom not far away from Mu Chenxue. Brother Yen, if we have the chance to meet again in the future, let's drink and chat. Elder Raiwa cupped his hands towards Yen Ji and said with a smile. Brother Raiwa is too courteous. If possible, we will drink to our heart's content. Yen Ji said with a laugh. Let's go. Elder Raiwa cupped his hands and gave a sharp cry. The Phoenix Phantom under his feet released a sea of flames as it flew into the sky. Watching the Phoenix Phantom gradually disappear into the distance, Xiao Yu's eyes darkened. He said to Yen Ji, Martial Uncle Yen Ji, what should we do when Zhuan realizes what happened? Yen Ji was stunned. Soon after, he said with a soft sigh, that's why that girl Chenxue hid it from that brat Tun and left by herself. Otherwise, with that brat Zhuowen's personality, who knows what he would do? That would be truly troublesome. Rumble. Just as Yen Ji's voice fell, a shocking explosion rang out. Capital Sky Peak's floating snow pavilion actually collapsed and a figure suddenly flew out. Chenxue. A distant and mournful voice rang out from within the floating snow pavilion. Soon after, a pair of 10-foot large purple lightning wings appeared on the figure's back. It turned into lightning and chased after the Phoenix Phantom in the distance. Just now, if it was not for Xiao He and Qing Huang, Zhuowen might still be in a deep sleep. After waking up, the first thing Zhuowen did was to check the lights in the room. He discovered that there was actually a sleeping incense inside and it was an extremely powerful sleeping incense. At the same time, he also discovered that Mu Chenxue was not in the room. Combined with Mu Chenxue's strange actions from before, he knew that Mu Chenxue was definitely hiding something from him. Chapter 1403. By how this was especially the case when he saw Mu Chenxue ride the enormous Phoenix Phantasm and disappear into the horizon. Zhuowen's eyes almost cracked as he immediately chased after her. Zhuan, you won't be able to catch up. Yen Ji frowned slightly. He pressed down with his right hand and a terrifying saint energy crushed down on Zhuowen's body. Get lost. Zhuowen's eyes were scarlet red. He slashed with his right hand and the space split open as he escaped into the void, just in time to dodge Yen Ji's attack. When he reappeared, he was already several hundred meters away. This little guy has actually grasped the void power to such an extent? Yen Ji frowned slightly as he watched Zhuowen disappear several hundred meters away as if he had teleported. Surprise was revealed in his eyes. Martial Uncle Yen Ji, quickly chase after Zhuowen. We can't let him do anything foolish. Xiao Yu said to Yen Ji. Yes. Xiao Yu, follow me and chase after him. Let's try to intercept that little guy Zhuowen. Given the character of those people from the Burning Heaven sect, I'm afraid that they won't let Zhuowen off so easily. Yen Ji nodded. Swoosh swoosh. The two of them escaped into the void at the same time and chased after Zhuowen. After all, the two of them had studied the Void Stone Tablet before and had a unique understanding of the void power. The many people in the Inner Academy revealed complicated expressions in their eyes when they saw this scene. Many disciples from the Inner Academy knew about the matter between Mu Chenxue and Zhuowen. Now that Mu Chenxue was about to be taken away by the Burning Heaven sect, it was excusable for Zhuowen to go crazy. When did Zhuowen, this brat, become so proficient in void energy? Yan Ji and Xiao Yu, who were chasing behind, used the void power repeatedly, but discovered that they were unable to close the distance between them and Zhuowen. Instead, they were getting further and further away. Zhuowen unfurled his purple lightning wings. Combined with the void power, his speed was as fast as lightning. Wherever he passed, the air was torn apart and space collapsed. Qin Shui! Zhuowen roared towards the sky. His roar pierced through gold and cracked stone as he rushed into the clouds, surging and surging. There were more than a dozen figures standing on top of the huge phoenix shadow. Elder Raiwa was sitting cross-legged at the head, while Mu Chenxue and Yen Ruhua were standing on either side of Elder Raiwa. Behind the three of them, there were about 10 youths standing in 2 rows. These youths were looking at Yen Ruhua with reverence. Obviously, they were also disciples of the Burning Heaven sect. Zhuowen's voice was transmitted over, causing the gazes of many people in the phoenix illusory figure to harden. Mu Chenxue's delicate body trembled as a trace of emotion surfaced on her calm and pretty face. Yen Ruhua glanced indifferently at Mu Chenxue, then turned her head to look behind her. She said indifferently, "Is that Zhuowen? Someone you like?" Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes narrowed as she coldly said, "I don't know this person. He should be one of my pursuers in the academy. Let's speed up and throw him off." "Oh. So he's one of your pursuers. Does that mean that if I kill this guy, you won't have any objections?" Yen Ruhua said with a cold smile. Mu Chenxue's face slightly changed as she said, "Yen Ruhua, you dare?" "Ha ha, I'm just saying. Why are you in such a hurry? He's just someone you don't know, so it's fine if you kill him. Don't tell me you still miss him?" Yen Ruhua's lips curled up as she laughed. "He's a disciple of the Divine Academy. Since you've killed the innocent, the Divine Academy won't let you off." Mu Chenxue coldly said, "Of course I know that. I was just joking. I just wanted to play with this guy. Elder Raiwa wouldn't mind slowing down, right?" Yen Ruhua said with a smile. Elder Raiwa still squinted his eyes as he nodded and said, "Don't go overboard." After saying that, Elder Raiwa clapped his right hand and the phoenix shadow under his feet stopped. Yen Ruhua's face stiffened as she said solemnly, "Elder, don't worry. I won't do anything rash." After saying that, Yen Ruhua pointed at an extremely sturdy man behind her and said, "By Hao, you're the strongest in this group. Go and test that guy behind you." The man called Bai Hao slowly stood up and nodded at Yen Ruhua. His face was expressionless as he pushed off with both of his legs. His huge body was like a small mountain as he leaped into the air. Soon after, he descended and headed straight for Zhuowen. Bai Hao was the strongest in this group of disciples. His cultivation had reached the invincible emperor realm, and he had comprehended the law of gold. His body was covered in gold and was as tough as iron. It was extremely terrifying. "Elder Raiwa, this has nothing to do with him. Why did you listen to Yen Ruhua and stop?" Mu Chenxue's face changed slightly as she shouted. Elder Raiwa shook his head and said with a sigh, "Miss Chenxue, you're the holy maiden of the Burning Heaven sect and you're destined to marry the young palace master of the Snow Palace. Ruhua has already told me about you. Is that guy behind you called Zhuowen?" Mu Chenxue bit her lower lip and said coldly, "Yes. Are you satisfied now? You can leave now." "That brat is indeed Zhuowen. However, Chenxue, your taste is really bad. Zhuowen is only at the 7th level of the martial emperor realm. How could he be worthy of your liking? I think you must have been deceived by him." Yen Ruhua's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness as she said in a strange tone. "Shut up," Mu Chenxue coldly shouted. Then she said to Elder Raiwa in a serious tone, "Can we leave now? This matter has nothing to do with Zhuowen. I don't want him to be involved." Yen Ruhua was stunned and his eyes turned gloomy. Mu Chenxue had insulted him because of Zhuowen, so naturally he was angry. Elder Raiwa narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "Miss Chenxue, let me see the chastity mark on your right arm." When these words came out, Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes narrowed and she coldly said, "What are you looking at that for?" Although you're an elder of the sect, you don't have the qualifications to tell me what to do. Elder Raiwa said with a faint smile, although I don't have the qualifications, the sect master does. He sent me here this time. Ever since Ruhua searched Elder Chio's soul, the matter of you and Juan has spread throughout the Burning Heaven sect. Otherwise, why do you think we would send so many people to invite you back to the sect? Apart from asking you to return, it is actually also related to that Juan. If you are able to prove that there is nothing going on between you and Juan, I will immediately not pursue the matter with him. Mu Chenxue slowly stepped back. Her eyebrows slightly knit as she coldly said, "Are you doubting me?" "I don't dare." Elder Raiwa shook his head and said, "This old man just wants to confirm it." After saying this, Elder Raiwa stretched out his withered right hand. A terrifying saint energy spread out and surrounded Mu Chenxue, making it hard for her to move. "Elder Raiwa, what do you mean by this? Let me go," Mu Chenxue said in a panic. Elder Raiwa ignored Mu Chenxue's protest. With a swipe of his right hand, Mu Chenxue's forearm cuff was shattered. The red dot that should have been there had already disappeared. The chastity sand is gone? Yen Ruhua's pupils shrank. Her gaze was extremely gloomy. Elder Raiwa clenched his fist. His knuckles cracked as a surge of killing intent burst out from his body. He first glanced at Mu Chenxue, then his gaze fell on Juan. "It seems that something has happened between the two of you. This boy deserves to die," Elder Raiwa said with a ferocious expression. "You can't kill him." Mu Chenxue's expression changed drastically. She stood in front of Elder Raiwa and said, "A mere 7th level Great Emperor. I don't need to do anything. How can deal with this boy? You stay here and wait for the sect leader to deal with you after we bring you back to the Burning Heaven sect," Elder Raiwa said indifferently. As for Mu Chenxue, she was imprisoned in place by Elder Raiwa's power. She couldn't move at all. Swoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air suddenly rang out. Bai Hao's huge body suddenly landed on top of Zhuowen, looking down at him from above. "Get lost!" Zhuowen roared angrily and punched out, directly attacking Bai Hao. Bai Hao grinned. He had comprehended the law of gold and his physical body was unparalleled. Wasn't this guy courting death by throwing a punch at him? At the thought of this, Bai Hao also threw a punch. The law of gold condensed on the surface of his fist. The fist wind whistled like the roar of a dragon and tiger. Boom! There was an explosion. Zhuan suddenly retreated dozens of steps. Bai Hao's body only swayed a little. He was as still as a mountain as he stood firmly on the spot. "Your strength is not bad. It's quite rare for a 7th level Great Emperor to have such strength. However, you're going to die in my hands today." Bai Hao grinned. He took a step forward in the air, and a golden light shone brightly. He shot toward Zhuowen like a cannonball. "He's just a 7th level Great Emperor. He won't be able to last one round against senior brother Bai Hao. I'm afraid he'll be killed soon. I'm afraid he won't even need one round. Senior brother Bai Hao will be able to kill him in one move." The other disciples of the Burning Heavens sect on the Phoenix Phantom were chatting and laughing. They looked at Zhuowen and Bai Hao indifferently. In their opinion, Zhuowen was just a clown. Supreme Slaughter Dragon Seal. Zhuowen didn't hesitate to use the Supreme Slaughter Dragon Seal. His whole body was covered with blood-red marks. It looked extremely strange. At that moment, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent. He naturally saw Mu Chenxue, who was imprisoned by Elder Linghua, on the Phoenix's silhouette, and the killing intent in his heart rose to its peak. "A mere 7th level Great Emperor dares to show off in front of me? You're overestimating yourself." Bai Hao laughed. He didn't care about Zhuowen at all. His right hand suddenly descended from the sky. The gold elemental law condensed, causing his body to flicker with golden light. "Overestimating myself?" Zhuowen murmured. He threw out a punch. Flames burned in his left eye. The fire elemental law rushed out and attached itself to his fist. Rumble! The two fists collided. The smile on Bai Hao's face froze. He exclaimed, "Fire elemental law? You've also mastered the power of law?" "Merciless killing," Zhuowen said softly, and then the huge shadow of the Taisha divine dragon appeared in the void behind him. It roared, and Zhuowen's power rose to the extreme. With the addition of the supreme slaughter dragon seal and the fire elemental law, Zhuowen's strength had soared to an extremely terrifying level. Puchi! Bai Hao screamed miserably. His right fist was dislocated by Zhuowen's punch. Chapter 1404. Instant kill, die. Yuan didn't give Bai Hao any chance to catch his breath. He took a step forward and punched out. Every punch contained the power of the law of fire and the Tai Chi dragon seal. Bastard, stop. Yen Ruhua narrowed his eyes, emitting a deep chill. The other 9 members of the Phoenix Shadow all stood up, their killing intent soaring to the sky. Be annihilated. Bai Hao was beaten to the point that he couldn't fight back. Zhuan didn't care about Yen Ruhua's words at all. He clenched his right hand into a fist and punched Bai Hao's chest. The law of fire instantly erupted and enveloped Bai Hao. At the same time, the Tai Chi dragon shadow floating behind Zhuan swooped down and swallowed Bai Hao. Then a terrifying explosion rang out. A tragic cry rang out from the explosion. When the explosion gradually dissipated, Bai Hao's figure had completely disappeared from everyone's sight. Bai Hao, the invincible Emperor Lord of the Burning Heaven sect, had died in front of their eyes just like that? You're courting death. Yen Ruhua's eyes were gloomy. He was so angry that his body trembled. He said to Elder Raiwa, "Elder, let me kill this boy." Elder Raiwa narrowed his eyes and nodded, "Kill him." He killed a member of the Burning Heaven sect and took Miss Qin Shue's virginity. This boy must not be allowed to live in this world. Haha, that's exactly what I wanted. He's able to kill an invincible Emperor Lord at the 7th layer Emperor realm. His strength isn't bad, but I'd like to test his strength. Yen Ruhua grinned. Flames erupted from his body and the law of fire lingered around him. The temperature of the surrounding air rose to the extreme, producing strange hissing sounds. Boy, this Yen Ruhua isn't simple. His strength is unfathomable. Suddenly, Xiao Hei's voice rang in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. Unfathomable? Judging from Yen Ruhua's aura, he should be a half-step sage. Moreover, he is only a half-step sage who has grasped the law of fire. How can he be so unfathomable? Zhuan asked in astonishment. That's because this guy doesn't control just one type of law. Aside from the law of fire, I can sense another type of law on him, Xiao Hei said cautiously. Hearing this, Zhuowen's pupils shrank to the size of needles. He never imagined that the holy son of the Burning Heaven sect, Yen Ruhua, would have grasped more than one type of law. He was absolutely a genius. Whoosh whoosh. Yen Ji and Xiao Yu also arrived, attracting the attention of Raiwa and Yen Ruhua. Elder Raiwa Duan is a personal disciple of my Aesir God Institute's mysterious origin peak. I hope you can be magnanimous. Yen Ji cupped his hands and smiled. Raiwa, however, shook his head and said, if it was before, I would naturally not make things difficult for him with just a word from Brother Yen. However, I can't do that now. Yen Ji's eyes narrowed as he said, Brother Raiwa, what do you mean? This kid just killed Bai Hao of my Burning Heaven sect and did something intolerable. If I don't kill him, the heavens will not tolerate my Burning Heaven sect, Raiwa said indifferently. Can't you make an exception? Yen Ji said in a low voice. Make an exception? How laughable. How can I make an exception? This kid will die today even if he doesn't. Elder Raiwa sneered, then glanced at Yen Ji and said, Brother Yen, I advise you not to get involved in this mess. The Burning Heaven sect isn't an organization that Aesir God Institute can afford to offend. Are you threatening me? Yen Ji frowned slightly. Elder Linghua smiled and said, You can understand it this way. Our southern barbarians are stronger than your eastern barbarians, and the Burning Sky sect has 2 heavenly saint powerhouses, and the number of saints they have is several times that of your divine academy. I'm not boasting, but I want to wake Brother Yen up. Is it worth it to go against the Burning Heaven sect for a junior who has yet to become a saint? As soon as these words came out, Yen Ji frowned, revealing a trace of hesitation. Elder Raiwa's words weren't without reason. In a sense, the Burning Heaven sect was even stronger than the Blue Dragon Hall. This was because the Burning Heaven sect had 2 heavenly saints and more profound sages than the Blue Dragon Hall. This was a force that was even more terrifying than the Blue Dragon Hall. Acer God Institute didn't need to fear the Blue Dragon Hall, but the Burning Heaven sect really needed to be carefully considered. Martial Uncle Yenji Zhuan is a member of our institute. We can't just ignore him, Xiaoyu quickly said. Yenji took a deep breath and said, Zhuan is a disciple of my institute after all. You killed my disciple in my divine specter realm. You really don't put me in your eyes. Elder Raiwa slightly frowned and coldly said, Then I'll take a step back. I can choose not to deal with this boy, but you can't interfere with Yen Ruhua and the others of the same generation. Whether they live or die is up to the heavens. Otherwise, this old man might go back and report everything that happened here to the sect master. Yenji looked at Zhuowen, who wasn't far away, and said with a sigh, Yin, I can only fight for you this much. The rest is up to you. Martial Uncle, you don't have to blame yourself. I will never forget what you've done for me. Zhuan nodded, then looked at Yen Ruhua and coldly said, I heard that you're the holy son of the Burning Heaven sect. Fight with me. If I lose, you can take my life. If you lose, you have to let Chen Shui go. Yen Ruhua grinned and said, You're just an ant. You actually have the face to talk about conditions with me. Today, whether you win or lose, you'll die. After saying that, Yen Ruhua gave a look to the other 9 people. The 9 of them rushed out and surrounded Zhuowen from 9 directions. They exploded with terrifying energy. Among the 9 people, 3 of them were invincible Emperor Lords who had grasped the laws. The rest were all 9th Heaven Emperor realm experts. This was an extremely powerful force. It was more than enough to take down a 7th Heaven Emperor realm expert. Despicable! Xiao Yu's eyes turned cold. The law of fire lingered around him as he flew out toward Jun. He wanted to help Zhuowen. Old man, I see that you're also grasping the law of fire. I've also grasped the law of fire. Why don't we play? Yen Ruhua took a step forward and blocked Xiao Yu's path. His face was full of ridicule. Get lost! Xiao Yu roared and threw out a punch. Flames surged into the sky and turned into countless fire pythons. They rushed towards Yen Ruhua and enveloped him. Yen Ruhua curled his lips and clenched his right hand. The law of fire in his right hand turned into a flaming bow. He held the bow in his left hand and pulled the bowstring with his right hand. He pulled the bowstring to a full moon and a flaming arrow appeared in the flaming bow. Then, Yen Ruhua released 2 fingers on his right hand. Boom! The sound of the bowstring was like lightning. The flaming arrow pierced through the void with a thunderous sound. It instantly shot through one of the fire pythons and turned it into ashes. Boom! 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 Yen Ruhua shot out arrow after arrow. His right hand pulled the bowstring as fast as lightning. Every arrow accurately shot through the fire pythons. In less than 5 breaths, the fire pythons formed by Xiao Yu's law of fire were all destroyed by Yen Ruhua's arrows. Boom! Yen Ruhua pulled the bowstring again and shot out another arrow. This arrow was extremely fast and landed in front of Xiao Yu in an instant. Xiao Yu's pupils shrank and he dodged to the side. However, the arrow was too fast and it still pierced through his collarbone, causing blood to spurt out. Old man, don't come any closer. Otherwise, the arrow won't have pierced through your collarbone but your heart, Yen Ruhua said indifferently. Xiao Yu was astonished. With Yen Ruhua's personality, he wouldn't leave anyone alive. If it weren't for the presence of a heavenly saint like Yen Ji, he would have killed Xiao Yu with an arrow. Xiao Yu's eyes were spitting fire. Just as he was about to rush forward again, he was stopped by Yen Ji. Xiao Yu, you're no match for Yen Ruhua. Don't provoke that guy anymore, Yen Ji said solemnly. But Tun? Xiao Yu said unwillingly. Yen Ji said with bright eyes, have you forgotten what happened in the Martial Saint Tower? This guy is not as simple as he looks. He killed Xian Zhong and the Martial Saint. Do you think he'll be killed so easily? Xiao Yu was stunned. He recalled what happened in the Martial Saint Tower and gradually calmed down. Although he was Zhuowen's master, to be honest, Zhuowen's strength had already surpassed his. Although he did not want to admit it, it was a fact. I hope nothing happens to him. Xiao Yu muttered in a low voice with some worry. Mu Chen-shui, who had been confined to her spot by Elder Ling Hua, had a misty look in her beautiful eyes as she stared intently at the surrounded figure. Chen-shui, don't worry. I'll bring you away from here very soon. Surrounded, Yuan raised his head slightly and looked at Mu Chen-shui on the phoenix's figure. His lips curled into a smile. You want to bring Miss Chen-shui away? You're dreaming. I think you should leave your life behind first. Surrounded by 9 people, a square-faced young man sneered. He was surrounded by the law of earth. He was one of the 3 invincible imperial lords. The other 2 invincible imperial lords had grasped the law of wood and the law of water respectively. They were the most common of the 5 elemental laws. Let's attack together and kill him, shouted the square-faced youth who had grasped the laws of earth. Immediately, the 9 of them spread out in 9 different directions around Zhuo Wen, attacking Zhuo Wen from both sides. All of you die. Retracting his gaze, Yuan was filled with killing intent. He tapped his forehead with his right hand and took out the Fushi cauldron. Then, he flicked his finger and took out a nascent soul from his spirit ring. Jun, let me go now or I'll teach you a lesson. This nascent soul was Lung Quan. At this moment, Lung Quan was wailing like a ghost and cursing viciously at Tun. Jun ignored Lung Quan's curses. He grabbed the nascent soul and stuffed it into the Fushi cauldron. Then, 2 gigantic arms reached out from the Fushi cauldron. Boom boom boom. The 9 people were caught off guard and were instantly struck by the 2 giant hands. 6 of them were instantly annihilated. These 6 were the Burning Sky Sect's disciples who had yet to master the power of law and were at the 9th level of the Emperor realm. What is this? The remaining 3 revealed terrified expressions. The 3 of them had indeed blocked the attack just now. However, they did not feel good about it. Zhuo Wen's eyes were still cold. He flicked his finger again and took out Xian Zhong's nascent soul. This was the only nascent soul he had left, and he threw it into the Fushi cauldron. Boom boom boom. Chapter 1405. The Law of Smoke and Fire. The head was huge and its facial features were blurry. Only the upper half of its body was covered in black armor. It looked mighty and domineering. A wild and terrifying aura spread out and shook the heavens and the earth. What's that? The square-faced young man and the other 2 were terrified. The aura of the figure that suddenly appeared from the Fushi cauldron made even them tremble. The 3 of you run. Yen Ruhua, who was originally unconcerned, was shocked and shouted at the square-faced young man and the other 2. Run! The square-faced young man and the other 2 were startled. They took a step forward and hurriedly ran away from the figure. Do you think you can escape? Zhuo Wen sneered. He pressed his right hand down and the huge figure slapped down with both hands at an extremely fast speed. No. Block it for us. The Fushi real body was too fast. In an instant, the hands were in front of the square-faced young man and the other 2. The whistling sound of the wind was constantly heard. The power of the laws of earth, wood, and water surged out from the 3 of them, forming a protective shield of 3 different colors in an attempt to block Fushi's hands. Rumble! A pair of gigantic hands slammed down on the protective barrier, causing it to tremble. Cracks began to appear on its surface. Stop, or you'll die a horrible death. Yen Ruhua shouted angrily as he stepped out into the void. At the same time, he held the bow in his left hand and pulled it into the shape of a full moon with his right hand. With a bang, countless flaming arrows shot out like a rain of fire towards the Fushi real body. Zhuo Wen stepped forward and blocked in front of the Fushi real body. The dragon seal in his right hand burst out with a terrifying light. Heaven Lock Dragon Seal. Countless pitch-black chains surged out and transformed into a gigantic black dragon, blocking Zhuo Wen's path. Clang, clang, clang. Arrows rained down from the sky and blasted the black dragon. The black dragon kept retreating and roaring. Taishang Dragon Seal. Zhuo Wen roared angrily, and the shadow of the divine slaughter dragon appeared in the void. When the black-locked dragon was shot to pieces by the rain of arrows, the shadow of the divine slaughter dragon stood in front of Zhuo Wen, completely blocking the rain of arrows. Yen Ruhua's expression froze and she shouted coldly, "You have to think carefully. They are all disciples of the Burning Heaven sect. Do you know the consequences of killing them?" Zhuan glanced indifferently at Yen Ruhua and sneered, "Idiot, I've already killed many people from the Burning Heaven sect. And you're telling me this now? Since I've already killed them, what's the difference between killing a few more or a few less?" As he spoke, the Fushi True Body's hands suddenly smashed down, and the protective barrier formed by the three of them collapsed completely. The square-faced young man and the other two screamed. Their eyes were filled with despair. Fushi's hands were too powerful. They couldn't resist at all. Puchi. As the giant hand fell, the three of them exploded into a mist of blood before they could even make a sound. Even their nascent souls were crushed into dust by the powerful force. Yen Ruhua, who was rushing over, suddenly froze. His eyes were extremely gloomy. All the disciples he had brought this time had been killed by Zhuowen. Yen Ruhua's heart was burning with rage. "Ruhua, don't hold back. Kill him." On the Phoenix Phantom, Elder Raiwa's eyes were full of killing intent as she said to Yen Ruhua. If it weren't for Yen Ji, perhaps Elder Raiwa would have done it herself. "Jun, there's no one in this world who can save you now." Yen Ruhua roared. His whole body was like fire. He clenched his hands and the law of fire in his palms turned into two flaming sabers. Above Zhuowen, Yen Ruhua's hands danced. Flames erupted from the two sabers, bursting out into a terrifying line of fire and slashing down. Why should Yun be afraid? Zhuowen stretched out his right hand and the tiger head clear golden spear appeared in his palm. His left eye turned fiery red and the law of fire surged out. He then wiped the surface of the spear with his right hand and the law of fire surged and turned into a flaming spear. Swoosh! The flaming spear was like a venomous snake. It flicked upwards and accurately blocked the two sabers. Rumble! Instantly, waves of fire spread out in all directions like the waves of a vast ocean. The fire waves covered a large area and stretched for thousands of miles. Yen Ji and Elder Ling Hua raised their own shields and completely blocked the incoming waves of fire. You should be proud of yourself for having such combat strength in the 7th level Emperor realm. However, your time to be proud will soon be ended by me. I will send you to hell. Yen Ruhua's lips curled into a cold smile. He changed the direction of his saber and the flames on his saber turned into ropes that wrapped around Jun. Zhuowen frowned slightly and raised his right hand in an attempt to separate the flames. Everyone says that I have mastered the law of fire. However, they are all wrong. I have not only mastered the law of fire. In fact, I have also mastered the law of fire that is derived from the law of fire. This is a talent that belongs to me. Yen Ruhua suddenly muttered to himself, "This law of fire, I have named it the law of smoke and fire. Smoke is like fire and fire can explode. Like fireworks, the exploding flames are the most beautiful." Rumble! As soon as Yen Ruhua finished speaking, Yun realized that the flames that he had blocked suddenly expanded rapidly. Then, like fireworks, they exploded into terrifying flames. Rumble! Moreover, these explosions were not short-lived, but continuous and unending. In the space where Zhuowen was, countless flames erupted, forming dazzling fireworks. The law of smoke and fire that is derived from the law of fire? Your Burning Heaven sect's Yen Ruhua is really a peerless genius. He can actually comprehend such an extraordinary law from the law of fire. Not far away, Yen Ji's gaze turned serious. Even he was a little shocked by the uniqueness of Yen Ruhua's law of smoke and fire. It's not that easy to be the Holy Son of the Burning Heaven sect. Since Yen Ruhua can become the Holy Son, it has already proven his talent and strength. Of course, that Jun is also doomed. Yen Ruhua, who has 2 laws, already has the strength to kill a half-step saint. Not to mention that Zhuowen, who is only a 7th-layer Emperor realm expert. Elder Raiwa raised his chin high and glanced at the battlefield that was constantly bursting with fireworks. The corners of his mouth were full of complacency. Yen Ji and Xiao Yu both frowned. Although they were extremely worried, they didn't believe that Jun would die so easily. What a beautiful firework! Jun, you should be able to rest in peace now that you've died under such firework. Yenrua's eyes were blurred as he looked down at the void below. The corners of his mouth were full of smiles. Die in peace? You are not qualified to let me die in peace. An indifferent voice resounded from within the smoke and fire. The smile on Yenrua's face suddenly froze. His gaze shifted downwards and landed on the source of the voice. Amidst the smoke and fire, a figure slowly walked out. This figure was slender and had a handsome face. The strange thing was that his right eye was icy blue and filled with cold energy. It actually contained the law of ice. His left eye was fiery red and burning hot. It contained the law of fire. The two laws gushed out from his eyes and circled around him, outlining the illusory image of a palace that was just big enough to accommodate one person. The defensive power of the illusory image of the palace was amazing. The fireworks that exploded in the surroundings couldn't corrode Juon at all when they touched the surface of the palace. The law of ice and the law of fire. You have mastered two laws? Yenrua's pupils shrank into needles as he muttered in disbelief. Even Elder Raiwa's face froze. He frowned slightly and stared at Juon. What? You, a self-proclaimed genius, are you very surprised to see that I have mastered two types of laws? Juon raised his head and stared at Yenruo provocatively. Then he stomped his right foot on the ground. Suddenly, the pitch-black dark cold poison and the nine-colored nine flames karmic fires swept out from his body. He had already infused the law of ice and the law of fire into these two heaven-level ice and fire energies. Their power was much stronger than usual. Yenruo frowned slightly, but he didn't care much about the two energies that swept over. He swung the flaming long saber in his hands, and flames spewed out. Under his control, the flames all turned into fireworks and exploded. The law of smoke and fire had an extremely powerful explosive power. When the fireworks left his hands, they formed an explosive saber shadow that crossed the void and slashed at the ice and fire energies. I wonder how powerful the Ice and Fire Palace will be after infusing the law of ice and fire into it? Zhuowen licked his lips and put his hands together. Immediately, the ice and fire energies in the air blended together like water and milk, forming a huge palace the size of a mountain. Clang! The huge saber shadow formed by the law of smoke and fire struck the surface of the palace, creating countless sparks. However, the palace was not damaged at all. This scene stunned Yenruo. Then, he saw the huge ice and fire palace fall vertically and envelop Yenruo. Yenruo didn't even have time to react before he was suppressed by the ice and fire palace. Bastard! Break it! An angry roar came from within the ice and fire palace, followed by ear-piercing collisions. Obviously, Yenruo was constantly bombarding the palace. However, the ice and fire palace was extremely tough. Although Yenruo was strong, he was trapped in the palace and could do nothing. After all, the Ice and Fire Palace was a combination of the heaven-level ice and fire energy. Coupled with the law of ice and fire, its power was many times stronger than usual. It was more than enough to trap an ordinary half-saint. Even for a half-saint like Yenruo, although it couldn't completely trap him, it could still trap him for a while. Break it! Yenruo roared to the sky, and a terrifying aura flowed out of the Ice and Fire Palace. Then, a hole appeared in the front of the Ice and Fire Palace. Yenruo's figure stepped out of the hole. His eyes were full of killing intent as he stared at Jun and said, "Interesting. You have mastered the law of two elements, and you can combine them to form the shape of a palace. However, this can't trap me at all. You're dead for sure." Zhuowen's eyes were indifferent as he said, "Idiot, the best part is yet to come." Chapter 1406. Someone from the Blue Dragon Hall arrived. Boom. The energy produced by the explosion of the Ice Fire Palace was extremely terrifying. It formed a mushroom cloud in the sky, and the surrounding space within a few hundred miles collapsed and turned into spatial cracks. Ruhua! Elder Raiwa's eyes narrowed. Saint power surrounded his body as he took a step forward, intending to rush towards the center of the explosion. However, a stalwart figure appeared in front of Elder Linghua and blocked his path. Elder Raiwa, as seniors, it's better for us not to interfere in the matters of the younger generation, Yenji said nonchalantly. Not interfere? Yenji, I actually don't want to be enemies with Jiashan Academy, but I'm a little disappointed that you're protecting a traitor. Elder Raiwa's eyes were filled with rage, and his voice was extremely cold. This caused Yenji to frown. He faintly felt that something was wrong with Elder Raiwa. You forced me to do this. Elder Linghua's gaze turned extremely calm, after which, the void behind him exploded and thousands of thunderbolts surged out. Within those thunderbolts, there was an extremely frightening law of thunder. Law of lightning? Sapphire Shore? Yenji's eyes narrowed, and he could not help but exclaim. His expression was extremely ugly. Ha! Yenji, you didn't expect us to meet again, did you? Ha! You destroyed my law avatar last time. Today, I'll repay you properly. A voice that sounded like a great bell came from the countless bolts of thunder in the sky. A majestic figure walked out from the sea of thunder. Wherever he went, countless bolts of thunder would bow down to him and respect him. This person was the Hall Master of the Blue Dragon Hall, Sapphire Shore. Behind Sapphire Shore, there were two figures. These two figures were middle-aged men in long green robes. The auras of these two men were extremely vast, and their bodies were filled with terrifying saint power. Needless to say, both of them were saints. Oh no, let's go. Yenji's expression changed drastically. He took a step in the air and arrived beside Juan. He grabbed with his right hand and brought Juan away from this place. Yenji, you won't be able to bring that little bastard Juan away today. He will definitely die today. The corners of Sapphire Shore's mouth curled into a smile. Countless thunderbolts gathered in the void and enveloped the area within 1,000 miles, turning it into a lightning cage. Light. Yenji's eyes turned dark as his body emitted a brilliant glow. A giant sun rose into the sky and slammed into the edge of the lightning prison. Rumble. Earth-shaking tremors resounded. The boundless light of the sun and the lightning interweaved together like the might of the heavens, exploding into dazzling fireworks in the sky. After which, Yenji took a few steps back. His expression was extremely ugly. The lightning prison before him was extremely tough. It was likely that Sapphire Shore had been planning this for a long time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to set up such a powerful lightning prison in such a short time. Looking at the vast thunderbolts in the sky, Zhuowen's heart trembled. His entire body was trembling. It was too terrifying. The law of lightning released by Sapphire Shore was too terrifying. His law of lightning was much stronger than that of an invincible Emperor Lord and a half-saint. Facing Sapphire Shore's law of lightning, Yun felt like an ant facing an unreachable mountain. Swoosh! Elder Raiwa instantly flew to the explosion site of the Ice Fire Palace. He waved his right hand and the terrifying explosion energy was immediately wiped away. Then, an extremely miserable figure appeared. Bastard, bastard, I will definitely kill you. Yenruhua's face was as pale as snow. The law of smoke and fire surrounded his body. He had relied on the law of smoke and fire to resist the corrosion of the Ice Fire Palace's explosion. If Elder Raiwa hadn't wiped away the explosion energy in time, Yenruhua would have been in grave danger. Elder Raiwa, where is that little bastard? You must kill him. Yenruhua naturally noticed Elder Raiwa and couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Don't worry, this kid will definitely die. The people of the Blue Dragon Hall are here. Today, Uan will die even if he doesn't. Elder Raiwa's eyes were filled with killing intent. Zhuan had killed many of his Burning Heaven sect members and even destroyed Mu Qinshue's innocence. He wouldn't tolerate such an existence. Hearing this, Yenruhua also noticed the huge lightning cage that had formed in the distant sky. It's even better that the Blue Dragon Hall is here. I've heard that Zhuan is a descendant of the Ryuka. We don't need to take action, the Blue Dragon Hall will take action. I was too careless. I didn't expect Zhuan to be so strong. Yenruhua's eyes flickered as he sighed. When the Burning Heaven sect came to the Divine Spectre realm, The Blue Dragon Hall had found them and wanted to cooperate to deal with the Divine Academy and Zhuan. However, the Burning Heaven sect had their own dignity. They naturally wouldn't cooperate with the Blue Dragon Hall to deal with Emir Jr. As for the Divine Academy, they wouldn't go against them. The Divine Academy's influence wasn't small, and the Burning Heaven sect had no enmity with them. Elder Raiwa naturally wouldn't be used by Sapphire Shore. The series of events that had just happened made Elder Raiwa furious. In the end, he summoned Sapphire Shore and the others. Elder Raiwa, I hope that we can cooperate happily. If we can kill that little bastard Zhuan, the Blue Dragon Hall will definitely reward us greatly. Of course, if we can kill Yanji. Sapphire Shore led the 4 people behind him and landed in front of Elder Raiwa and Yen Ruhua. His smile was like a spring breeze. Elder Raiwa sneered and said, Yanji is a heavenly saint. Even if we work together, we won't be able to kill him. At most, we can defeat him. Killing Zhuan is more likely. Ha! I was just joking. Our main target this time is that Zhuan. If he doesn't die, we won't be at ease. Sapphire Shore said with a faint smile. In the lightning prison, Yanji's face was extremely ugly. He said to Zhuan with some anger, You're too impulsive. Nothing will happen to Qin Shui if she's brought back to the Burning Heaven sect. Why did you chase after her? Now it's good. You've been schemed against by that old fox Sapphire Shore. Zhuan's gaze was extremely calm. He said indifferently, Humans aren't plants. How can we be emotionless? If Marshal Granduncle finds it troublesome, you don't have to care about me. No one can take Qin Shui away from me. Looking at the stubborn youth in front of them, Yanji and Xiao Yu both had complicated gazes. There was no doubt that today's situation was a hopeless situation. Sapphire Shore had brought 2 saints. Adding Elder Raiwa, there were 4 saints this time. And now they only had 1 saint, Yanji. It could be said that the disparity was extremely great. Let's delay it for a while. Jiang Xian and Wenbai are coming. Yanji said with a sigh. Zhuan's eyes flickered. He cupped his hands sincerely to Yanji and said, Many thanks, Marshal Granduncle Yanji. Although Yanji was complaining, he did not leave Zhuan alone. This made Zhuan feel a trace of warmth in his heart. Fine. You're an inner courtyard disciple after all. Moreover, you have the Ice Flame Saint rune on you. Adding on your relationship with Han Tian, I have no choice but to save you. Yanji said somewhat helplessly. Outside the lightning prison, Sapphire Shore's gaze pierced through the lightning and landed on Zhuan. He said, I'll keep Yanji busy. I'll leave that little bastard Zhuan to Elder Raiwa. Elder Ling Huan nodded and said, Thank you, Temple Master Qin, for your generosity. Let's do it. Otherwise, the situation might change if we delay. As Sapphire Shore spoke, he dove into the lightning prison and shot towards Yanji. Yanji, the battle last time was not satisfying enough. Let's do it again. Sapphire Shore laughed heartily. His domineering voice resounded throughout the lightning prison. Sapphire Shore, you despicable and shameless bastard. Yanji's expression was ugly. 3 blazing suns surged out of his body once again. Together with the previous blazing sun, they formed 4 blazing suns. Lightning prison, break. A thunderous voice resounded. The 4 blazing suns rose to the highest point and erupted with a dazzling radiance. Then, the surrounding lightning prison began to tremble violently. The 4 blazing suns became more and more terrifying. In the end, the lightning prison suddenly collapsed. Whoosh! The moment the lightning prison was broken, Sapphire Shore had already arrived above Yanji. With a squeeze of his right hand, lightning condensed and turned into a several 100-meter tall lightning mountain that came crashing down. Light! Yanji was not afraid. He raised his hands and threw out the 4 blazing suns one by one. The 4 blazing suns connected and collided with the lightning mountain. Rumble! Instantly, the entire sky was enveloped by light and lightning. It was as if at this moment, the only thing left in the world was the collision of these 2 energies. Elder Raiwa took a step forward and arrived in front of Zhuan in an instant. He looked down at Zhuan as if he was looking at an ant. You're called Zhuan, right? I won't kill you today, but I'll leave your nascent soul behind and bring it back to the burning heaven sect. I'll make you beg for death. Miss Chen Shui is the saintess of my burning heaven sect. Who do you think you are to be worthy of her? You even took her virginity. I won't kill you, but I'll make you beg for death. After Elder Raiwa finished speaking, the law of fire around his body erupted. A sea of fire filled the sky, covering the entire horizon. Although Elder Raiwa also grasped the law of fire, he was a peak profound sage powerhouse. The law of fire he displayed was much stronger than Xiao Yu's. In front of Elder Raiwa, Xiao Yu might not even be able to withstand a single move. Elder Raiwa formed a seal with his hands. The law of fire around his body condensed into a giant tower, which suddenly pressed down on Jun. Zhuowen's forehead was covered in cold sweat. The pressure that Elder Raiwa gave him was too great. The pressure unique to sages made it difficult for Zhuowen to move. Ice and Fire Palace. Zhuowen gritted his teeth. The law of ice and the law of fire burst out from his eyes. The two laws combined with the dark cold poison and the 9 flames karmic fire to form the Ice and Fire Palace. The Ice and Fire Palace, which was several hundred meters tall, appeared behind Jun. The energy of ice and fire gushed out, outlining countless flowers of ice and fire. Rumble. Chapter 1407. I am the void, the gap is too big. Zhuan spat out a mouthful of blood as he watched the ice-fire palace crumble. He stumbled back and his body almost exploded into a bloody mist. Elder Raiwa, if you kill Zhuowen, I won't live either. Mu Chenxue shouted from the phoenix silhouette. Her voice was filled with anxiety and anger. Elder Raiwa's movements paused as soon as she said this. The giant flaming tower stopped in midair. Miss Chenxue, you've only been bewitched by him. I'll kill him and you'll forget him as time passes. Elder Raiwa coldly snorted. He pressed down with his right hand and the giant flaming tower came crashing down like a mountain. Everywhere it passed, flames spread and engulfed Zhuowen. A dragon's roar resounded as a giant dragon 10,000 feet long flew out from Zhuowen's body. Boom! The giant dragon struck out with its claw, striking the flaming tower. It actually caused the flaming tower to come to a halt. However, the giant dragon had to pay a price. Its claw was damaged by the law of fire and was burnt to a crisp. Let's go. Xiao Hei's deep voice rang out. He then bent down and lifted Zhuowen up before flying into the distance. Qing Hu Qing Xiang, the two of you stopped Zhuowen together. Sapphire Shore, who was fighting with Yan Ji, naturally saw the black dragon carrying Zhuowen away. He could not help but order the other 2 saints of the Blue Dragon Hall. The 2 nodded and disappeared. When they reappeared, they were already in front of Zhuowen and Xiao Hei. You can't escape. Zhuowen will die today. Qing Hu said indifferently. He joined forces with Qing Xiang. Powerful saint energy surrounded them and formed a powerful invisible barrier in front of them. Rumble. Xiao Hei swung her dragon tail. Like an earth-shattering whip, it came crashing down and smashed onto the barrier in front of her. Immediately, the barrier shook violently. However, it was unable to break through the barrier. Thud thud thud. Xiao Hei took a few steps back, and Zhuowen, who was on the dragon's body, looked extremely pale. He was still too weak against a saint. However, just as Xiao Hei retreated, 2 other powerful auras suddenly appeared in front of her. These 2 auras were no weaker than Qing Hu and Qing Xiang from the Blue Dragon Hall. The other 2 powerful saint energies shot out like pillars of light and blasted onto the barrier, causing cracks to appear on the barrier's surface before it finally collapsed. Who is it? Qing Hu and Qing Xiang's expressions changed slightly, and they both took a few steps back. In the sky ahead, 2 stalwart figures rushed over. Martial granduncles Jiang Xian and Wen Bai. Looking at the 2 figures, Zhuowen coughed and said rather weakly, Blue Dragon Hall, you guys are too shameless. Wen Bai roared angrily and rushed toward Qing Hu and Qing Xiang. He had always been a hot-tempered person, and now that he found out that the Blue Dragon Hall had once again invaded the Divine Spectre realm and was targeting a junior like Zhuowen, one could imagine the anger in Wen Bai's heart. Jiang Xian did not speak, But from the saint energies that erupted from his body, one could tell that his mood was not much better than Wenbai's. Qing Hu and Qing Xiang snorted coldly, but they were not afraid at all. They rushed out and rushed toward Wenbai and Jiang Xian respectively. Boom boom boom. The four of them suddenly collided, and immediately after, an extremely powerful energy ripple erupted and spread out in all directions. It was as if the entire world was trembling. Go! The moment Qing Hu and Qing Xiang were entangled, Xiaohe roared and ran forward without stopping. After all, Elder Raiwa was chasing after her. If she did not run, would she be waiting for her death? Go? You won't be able to escape. Elder Raiwa chuckled coldly. Just now, Qing Hu and Qing Xiang's obstruction had allowed Elder Raiwa to completely catch up with Xiaohe and Zhuon. He formed a seal with his hands again, and the law of fire surged. An endless sea of fire began to appear in the sky and spread out in all directions, instantly blocking Xiaohe's path. Die! At the same time, Elder Raiwa instantly appeared in front of Xiaohe. His right hand clenched in the air, and the rolling flames gathered and turned into a giant flaming hand that was thousands of feet long. It grabbed onto Xiaohe's dragon tail. The giant flaming hand exerted force, and then Xiaohe roared. Her huge dragon body trembled violently, and she was thrown to the ground by the giant flaming hand. Boom! Her huge dragon body smashed into the ground like a mountain, causing the entire ground to tremble violently, and countless cracks appeared on the ground. Elder Raiwa's attack was too powerful. Xiaohe kept squirming on the ground, and the scales on her dragon body flipped, and blood flowed out of her body. Xiaohe! Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. With a thought, he hurriedly recalled Xiaohe back to his sea of consciousness. With Xiaohe's current state, she could not continue fighting. Elder Raiwa was in the sea of fire, and he looked down at Zhuon with disdain and pity in his eyes. Pitiful aunt, you will definitely die today. Elder Raiwa's majestic voice rang out. Then he stomped his right foot in the air, and terrifying flames swept out, turning into a huge volcano. Rumble! The volcano fell toward Zhuon like a meteor. A terrifying pressure descended, causing Zhuon's blood and qi to boil, making it difficult for him to move. It's over! Elder Raiwa said indifferently with his hands behind his back. No one below the Saint Realm would be able to withstand this attack. As far as he was concerned, Zhuowen would undoubtedly die. This guy is dead for sure. Yen Ruhua, who was not far away, sneered when she saw this scene. The volcano that came crashing down contained all of Elder Raiwa's power of laws. Not to mention those below the Sage Realm, even sages who had just entered the profound Sage Realm would find it difficult to resist. Zhuon had not become a Sage Realm expert, and he was only a 7th-level Great Emperor. So what if his combat strength was heaven-defying? In front of a sage, he was still an ant-like existence. Zhuon could not withstand this attack. On the ground, Zhuowen's back was hunched, and his forehead was full of cold sweat. The terrifying pressure that came from above almost made him breathless. Zhuon raised his head with difficulty and stared at the volcano that came crashing down from the sky. It was getting closer and closer, and the terrifying heat roasted the ground, causing waves of heat to rise. Under this high temperature, Nguyen even felt his mouth and tongue go dry. Move! Move! Zhuon roared unwillingly. His survival instinct made him constantly twist his muscles, but it was in vain. The volcano was getting closer and closer, but Zhuowen's consciousness became somewhat blurry. The terrifying temperature almost roasted him into a dry corpse. Even though Zhuon tried his best to resist, he found that it was useless. What is the void? The void is me, and I am the void. In the desperate situation between life and death, Zhuon suddenly calmed down. The scene that he had seen in the void stone tablet inexplicably appeared in his mind. The scene seemed to be rewinding, constantly flashing and replaying in his head. It was extremely fast, replaying over and over again. The figure of a single person facing off against thousands of beasts was firmly imprinted in the depths of Zhuo Wen's mind. The void is illusory, and the laws of the void that are derived from it do not need to be grasped. Instead, they should be combined and mastered. Once you have the thought of grasping it, you will definitely fail. Suddenly, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a look of enlightenment. In the face of life and death, his mind worked very quickly. All the doubts that he had before became clear in this short moment. The laws of the void do not need to be grasped by the void. It only needs to be integrated into the void. The void is vast and boundless. How can a single person control it? Zhuan muttered to himself. Soon after, he slowly closed his eyes. Strands of void power spread around his body. His aura and body became faintly discernible, as if he had disappeared into the void. Boom! The volcano landed and smashed into the ground. Immediately, the ground trembled violently. The wildfire spread thousands of feet wide, and flames soared into the sky. Under the impact of the flames, not even a blade of grass grew. Looks like this kid is dead for sure. Raiwa had his hands behind his back. His eyes narrowed, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. However, his smile did not last for long. Soon after, a figure gradually appeared in the sky above the sea of fire. It was Zhuan. I am the void, and the void is me. Zhuan muttered in a low voice. The look of enlightenment in his eyes grew increasingly intense, like two small suns. What? How did this guy dodge my attack? Raiwa was stunned. Soon after, his face turned slightly ugly. After all, he was a peak profound sage expert. Attacking a junior who had yet to enter the sage realm should have been a one-hit kill. But now, his attack was actually futile. Naturally, he felt that he had lost face. You'd die. Raiwa coldly snorted. His hands formed a seal, and the laws of fire burst out. The terrifying volcano once again condensed and blasted towards Zhuan. Zhuan's eyes were still blurred. He still did not move. The moment the volcano approached, he slowly integrated into the void. The volcano once again missed, as if it had pierced through an illusion. What's going on? This guy? Ling Ho frowned slightly. At this moment, Zhuowen's condition was simply too strange. He had clearly not done anything, but he was like a phantom that had disappeared into the void. Ling Ho's attack was completely ineffective. That's the laws of the void? Not far away, the seriously injured Xiao Yu also saw Zhuowen's strange state. His eyes widened, and his expression changed. At this moment, Tuan was very similar to Yuan Ji. No, he hasn't completely comprehended the essence of the void, but he's already very close. Yan Ji and Qing Yuan had stopped fighting at this moment. Yan Ji descended beside Xiao Yu and looked at Zhuowen, who was in a state of sudden enlightenment, with pleasant surprise in his eyes. The laws of the void? Sapphire Shore narrowed his eyes, his expression somewhat ugly. He could not help but think of the figure who had also comprehended the laws of the void and caused a ruckus in the Blue Dragon Hall of the Dragon Wasteland. The laws of the void are not so easy to comprehend. This kid won't succeed, Sapphire Shore muttered to himself as if to comfort him. I don't believe that you can dodge all my attacks. Raiwa coldly snorted. He formed a seal with his hands and shouted, Fire rain. Chapter 1408. Exchange. The range of the rain of fire was extremely large. It practically enveloped the entire area where Zhuan could appear. Under the rain of fire, Zhuan repeatedly escaped into the void. The power of laws lingered around him. This power of laws belonged to the void. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Immediately, the space in front of Zhuowen completely collapsed. The rain of fire that was rushing toward Zhuowen seemed to have stopped in time. It was completely still in the collapsed space. What kind of law is this? Raiwa frowned. He looked at this scene in astonishment. Clearly, he had never seen the laws of the void before. Rumble. Afterwards, Raiwa was shocked to discover that the power of laws around Zhuan was growing stronger and stronger. As the power of laws grew stronger, the surrounding space began to tremble as if it would collapse at any time. I am the void. A distant voice rang out in all directions. Zhuan took a step forward and disappeared into the void as if he had evaporated from the world. When Zhuan reappeared, he was already behind Raiwa. Afterwards, Zhuan clenched his right hand. Immediately, a terrifying pressure appeared around Raiwa. Bang, bang, bang. This pressure was very terrifying. The space around Raiwa completely collapsed. The power generated from the collapse was extremely destructive. It was like a prison that trapped Raiwa within. He comprehended it. Yun has comprehended the laws of the void. Yan Ji and Xiao Yu exchanged glances. Their eyes were filled with pleasant surprise. After Yuan Ji, another person from their divine academy had comprehended the laws of the void. Floating nearby, Sapphire Shore's expression was extremely ugly. After Yuan Ji had caused a ruckus in the Blue Dragon Hall, he had a deep impression of the laws of the void. Or perhaps it could be said that he hated them to the core. The void law was one of the top laws among the many laws. It could be said to be an extremely shameless law. This was because a martial artist who had grasped the law of the void could enter the void at any time. Moreover, their speed was extremely fast, much faster than a martial artist who had grasped the law of the wind. Back then, Yuan Ji had only just entered the profound sage realm. In terms of combat power, he wasn't a match for Sapphire Shore, but by relying on the law of the void he made it difficult for Sapphire Shore to attack Yuan Ji. In the end, Yuan Ji left after causing a ruckus in the Blue Dragon Hall. This kid can't be left alive. Otherwise, he'll be a huge problem when he becomes a saint. Sapphire Shore narrowed his eyes, revealing a trace of coldness. His heart was filled with killing intent. At this moment, his desire to kill Zhuowen burned even more fiercely. Thousands of miles away, on top of Aoyuan Peak in excellent Divine College, a pillar of fire shot up into the sky like a fire dragon. It was as if it wanted to dye the entire sky red. This is the fire beacon of Aoyuan Peak? The pillar of fire that shot up into the sky immediately attracted the attention of countless disciples of the college. Many of them were so shocked that they stood up one after another. The reason was none other than the fact that the fire beacon had risen from Aoyuan Peak. As everyone knew, if one wanted to ignite the fire beacon of the 9 main peaks, one had to cultivate the strongest technique of their respective peak. The strongest technique of Aoyuan Peak was called the Void Immortal Scripture, and it was contained in the Void Steel. For hundreds of years, Aoyuan Peak had never ignited the fire beacon. The only time it had happened was hundreds of years ago. A genius named Yuan Ji had successfully comprehended the Void Immortal Scripture, comprehending the law of the void, and became famous overnight. Hundreds of years later, the fire beacon of Aoyuan Peak was ignited again, and the entire 9 peaks were shaken. Someone has successfully comprehended the Void Immortal Scripture? The other peak masters of the 9 peaks rushed out one after another, staring at the fire beacon on Aoyuan Peak in horror. Their mouths were wide open, and they didn't know what to say. The disciples of Aoyuan Peak were even more shocked. Lu Qing, the pro-disciple, stood in front of the wooden house, staring blankly at the fire beacon. She was speechless for a long time. Could it be Zhuowen? After coming back to her senses, Lu Qing murmured in a low voice, and a figure appeared in her mind. It seems that you, little bastard, have comprehended an incredible law. But after all, you haven't become a saint. How can you fight with me? Raiwa's eyes were gloomy. He felt the pressure of the collapsing void around him. He snorted coldly and quickly formed a seal with his hands. Wildfire incinerates the 9 heavens. As soon as he said this, the law of fire in his hands became more and more terrifying. Eventually, the flames raged, and the collapsing void completely collapsed under the power of the flames. Raiwa kicked out and rushed toward Zhuowen. The boundless sea of fire swept out and covered the space around Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked indifferent. He kicked the void and disappeared into the sea of fire like a phantom. When he reappeared, he was right behind Yenruhua. Bastard! Yenruhua's pupils shrank. He turned around and saw Zhuowen. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He kicked his feet and retreated. Zhuowen stretched out his right hand. Suddenly, the void around Yenruhua began to collapse layer by layer, forming a cube. Damn it, break! Yenruhua cursed in a low voice. The law of fire swept out and bombarded the surrounding void power. He found that the collapsing void was so tough that he could not break it. Swoosh! While Yenruhua was constantly bombarding the surrounding void power, Zhuowen instantly swept in front of him and punched him hard in the lower abdomen. Puff! Yenrua's back was bent like a cooked shrimp. This punch contained an extremely powerful void power. Yenruhua felt as if his internal organs had been displaced. Little bastard, how dare you? Elder Raiwa finally reacted. He roared and rushed toward Zhuowen. The terrifying law of fire swept out, trying to stop Zhuowen from moving further. Yenruhua, the holy son of the Burning Heaven sect, will die today. Zhuowen lifted Yenruhua with his right hand and immediately escaped into the void, avoiding Elder Raiwa's attack. Although Zhuowen had comprehended the law of void, his strength was not enough to fight against a saint. Facing Elder Raiwa head-on was simply courting death. Little bastard, do you only know how to run away? Elder Spirit Fire was so angry that he was going crazy. Zhuowen's style of shooting here and there was really too shameless. Jun carried Yenruhua and instantly came to Mu Chenxue, who was on the phoenix's shadow. He struck out with his right hand, trying to annihilate the saint power surrounding Mu Chenxue. Boom! Then, Yun frowned as he realized that his strength was unable to destroy the saint power surrounding Mu Chenxue. You are not a saint yet. It is impossible for you to break through Elder Raiwa's power. You are delusional. Yenruhua sneered with a vicious gaze. Yun slapped Yenruhua's right cheek, causing his cheek to swell. Yenruhua spat out a mouthful of blood, mixed with a few teeth. You dare to hit me? How dare you? Yenruhua was a little stunned. Ever since he started practicing martial arts, he had always been crowned as a genius. He had never suffered any major setbacks, let alone being slapped by anyone. Another resounding slap. Zhuowen mercilessly left a deep palm print on Yenruhua's left cheek. You are very noisy. If you continue to be noisy, I don't mind crippling you. Zhuowen's voice was extremely cold, and his eyes contained a strong killing intent, causing Yenruhua to abruptly swallow back the words he was about to curse. It's useless. Elder Raiwa is a powerhouse of the fragmented profound sage realm. He has already stepped into the peak of the profound sage realm. It is almost impossible for you to break through his shackles. Mu Chenxue was a little anxious and continued, You should leave. I will be fine when I return to the Burning Heaven sect. I don't believe it. Have you forgotten who my mother is? The matter between you and me has already spread in the Burning Heaven sect. How can you be fine when you return? Zhuowen sighed. Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes contained traces of mist. At the same time, she was touched. Zhuowen was willing to risk his life for her. How could she not be touched? However, she was more worried. After all, Elder Raiwa wasn't an ordinary sage. Facing such a powerful enemy, it would be very difficult for Zhuowen to defeat Raiwa. Boom! A terrifying wave of fire swept out from behind him, causing Zhuowen's gaze to be piercingly cold. Then he suddenly fled into the void, disappearing from where he stood. The attack from behind him immediately missed. Several hundred meters away, Zhuowen raised Yenruhua and said, If you don't want Yenruhua to die, I think you'd better not act impulsively. The angry Elder Raiwa's face suddenly turned sluggish. Looking at the extremely weak Yenruhua, he coldly said, Yenruhua is the holy son of the Burning Heaven sect. If you kill him, then you won't rest until you die. Ridiculous. Your Burning Heaven sect can kill me. Don't tell me I can't kill your Burning Heaven sect's people? Zhuowen sneered. Then what do you want? Elder Raiwa coldly said, Release Chenxue's shackles and I will return this waste to you. Zhuowen pointed at Yenruhua and said, These words immediately made Yenruhua spit out a mouthful of blood. He was the dignified holy son of the Burning Heaven sect, but he was actually called a waste by Zhuowen. This was really infuriating and hateful. Elder Raiwa's eyes flickered. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, All right, as long as you don't kill Ruhua. After saying this, Elder Raiwa came to Mu Chenxue's side and patted the latter's back with his right hand. Suddenly, the saint energy surrounding Mu Chenxue disappeared and the latter also regained her freedom. Can you release Ruhua now? Elder Raiwa coldly said. Let Chenxue come over first. Zhuowen indifferently said. Elder Raiwa narrowed his eyes and said, I hope you don't play any tricks. After he finished speaking, Elder Linghua stood to the side. Mu Qinshui glared at Elder Linghua hatefully, then with a kick of her jade-like foot, she flew towards Zhuowen. Can you release him now? Elder Raiwa coldly said. Zhuowen slightly knitted his brows. He didn't go back on his words. With a flick of his right hand, Yenruhua was thrown towards Elder Raiwa like trash. So, Mu Qinshui was like an otherworldly lotus flower as she arrived in front of Zhuowen. Qinshui, let's go. Let's leave this place and go far away. Zhuowen pulled Mu Qinshui's jade-like hand and said excitedly. I'll follow you far away. Mu Qinshui said with a slight nod. Boom. However, when Zhuowen was about to leave with Mu Qinshui, a terrifying law of fire came out of Mu Qinshui's body. Like a rope, it completely wrapped around Zhuowen. Chapter 1409. Zhou Tianzong? Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He had never expected Mu Qinshui to release such terrifying laws of fire. He was actually bound by the laws of fire. Zhuowen, Mu Qinshui was dumbstruck as her body trembled. She had never expected something like this to happen. She was unable to react in time. Elder Raiwa, you're despicable. After returning to her senses, Mu Qinshui glared at Raiwa, who had caught the smoke of fire. Her body trembled as she spoke in an extremely furious voice. Probably only a saint like Elder Raiwa could use such powerful laws of fire. Moreover, Elder Raiwa was the only person who had come into contact with Mu Qinshui. It was not difficult to guess that Elder Raiwa had hidden the power of the laws of fire on Mu Qinshui. When Mu Qinshui approached Zhuowen, she had used the power of the laws of fire to bind Zhuowen. Despicable and shameless. Yan Ji and Xiao Yu said at the same time. Yan Ji wanted to go and support Zhuowen, but he was stopped by Sapphire Shore. Yan Ji, don't ignore me, Sapphire Shore said indifferently. Yan Ji's eyes darkened as he said, Sapphire Shore, piss off. With that, Yan Ji did not waste any more words. The 4 blazing suns above his head illuminated the ground with their scorching light. The laws of light revolved around them as they charged towards Sapphire Shore. Sapphire Shore sneered. He was not afraid. Endless lightning spread as he met Yan Ji's attack head-on. The battle between the 2 heavenly saints was practically earth-shattering, but neither of them could do anything to the other. Elder Raiwa walked over step by step. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he said, I finally caught you. You seem to have comprehended some kind of extraordinary law just now. You're quite good at running away. However, it's all over now. Elder Raiwa, please let go of Zhuowen. I will follow you back to the Burning Heaven sect. Mu Qinshui stood in front of Zhuowen and said, Young Miss Qinshui, if you kill this Zhuowen, I can also bring you back to the Burning Heaven sect. Elder Raiwa shook his head and stretched out his right hand. The saint energy condensed from the precept of fire shot out like a rope, attempting to bind Mu Qinshui. I said let Zhuowen go. Mu Qinshui's eyes became even colder. Then, a phoenix mark appeared between her eyebrows. This mark was emitting a blazing light. An extremely frightening aura flowed out from the phoenix mark. Under this aura, the phoenix illusion brought about by the spiritual fire started to become restless and uneasy, emitting a somewhat frightened cry. The moment this aura was released, Raiwa and Yenruhua's expressions changed. Raiwa turned pale with fright as he said, Young Miss Qinshui, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Zhuowen, who was originally bound by the precept of fire, also felt the terrifying aura coming from Mu Qinshui's body. This aura was so terrifying that Zhuowen's heart faintly trembled. It was as if something in Mu Qinshui's body was awakening at this moment. Is there something in Qinshui's body? Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. His heart was filled with shock. If you don't stop now, I will protect Zhuowen even if I reach nirvana transformation. Mu Qinshui coldly said. This aura? Sapphire Shore and Yan Ji, who were fighting, also stopped fighting. The 2 of them looked at Mu Qinshui in surprise. This little girl is not simple. No wonder the welcoming team is so strong. It's clear that the Burning Heaven sect values her greatly. Yan Ji revealed a look of surprise. Although Sapphire Shore did not say anything, it could be seen from his expression that his mood was similar to Yan Ji's. AI. Young Miss Chen Shui, this child is not worth it for you to do this for him, right? You are trading your life for his. Elder Raiwa said with a sigh. Whether it's worth it or not isn't up to you to decide. Mu Chen Shui shook her head. The aura around her body became more and more terrifying. The phoenix mark on her forehead seemed like it wanted to break free as it released a blazing light. Chen Shui, don't cause trouble. Suddenly, a sonorous voice boomed in the sky. A terrifying sea of fire surged in the sky, finally converging into an extremely majestic figure. This figure was formed from black flames and it had the appearance of a middle-aged man. Its eyes were pitch black and it had an unquestionable dignity. Moreover, the aura around this figure was very strong, being even more terrifying than Elder Raiwa's aura. Greetings, Sect Master. Elder Raiwa and Yen Ruhua's eyes slightly narrowed before they respectfully bowed to this figure. Sect Master? Burning Heaven Sect's Sect Master? Zhuowen's eyes slightly narrowed as he stared right at this giant figure. Without knowing why, he felt that just based on the aura of this Burning Heaven Sect's Sect Master, it was not weaker than Yan Ji or Sapphire Shore. Could it be that the strength of the Burning Heaven Sect's Sect Master was above Yan Ji and Sapphire Shore's? This fellow Zhou Tianzong's strength has increased again. Just his law clone has the strength of the Yin Sky Sacred Realm, so his main body should be at least in the Yang Sky Sacred Realm. He truly is a terrifying fellow. Sapphire Shore's eyes slightly narrowed as he looked at the giant figure formed from black flames with fear. Mu Chenshue's delicate body slightly trembled. Her beautiful eyes stared at the giant figure in the sky as she clenched her fists. Zhuan could clearly feel the fear on Mu Chenshue's body. She was currently trembling out of fear. Could it be because of the Burning Heaven Sect's Sect Master? Zhou Tianzong nodded at Raiwa and Yen Ruhua before his pitch-black eyes fell on Mu Chenshui. Chen Shui, how long are you going to fool around? You've been in the Eastern lands for long enough. Come back to the sect with this lord, Zhou Tianzong said calmly. Mu Chenshue's delicate body trembled even more violently when she heard this. She bit her lower lip and said in a deep voice, No, I'm not going back, nor do I want to go back. Zhou Tianzong fell silent. His eyes narrowed as he looked deeply at Mu Chenshue. I heard that you fell in love with a Ryuka descendant called Zhuan. Is it this brat? After saying this, Zhou Tianzong's deep eyes slightly shifted and fell on Zhuan. I heard that you're a Ryuka descendant. I wonder what's your relationship with that Long Xiaotian? That lowly guy did many good things in the past, Zhou Tianzong said calmly. What qualifications do you have to call my father a lowly guy? Who do you think you are? Zhuan said with some annoyance. Zhou Tianzong's eyes became deeper as he laughed. Huh, so it's like this. You're actually the son of that Long Xiaotian. You really are a bastard. Bastard? Zhuan was unable to restrain his anger as he roared like a mad lion. I don't have time to care about ants like you. Chen Shui, come with me. There are many things in the sect that require your help. Zhou Tianzong's face became serious. With a wave of his sleeve, a black flame filled the air and fell on Mu Chenshue's body. This black flame was very strange. When it fell on Mu Chenshue's body, it immediately suppressed the powerful aura coming from Mu Chenshue's body. The mark on her forehead also gradually dimmed before it disappeared. Then, Zhou Tianzong curled his right finger and the black flame carried Mu Chenshue in his direction. Chenshue. Zhuan stared at the beautiful figure that was gradually disappearing. His fists were tightly clenched. His heart was filled with anger, but he had nowhere to vent it. What a pity. You can't even protect the person you like. I think it's better if you kill yourself. Yen Ruhua coldly mocked from the side. Shut up. No one can take Chen Shui from my hands. Zhuowen suddenly shouted out loudly. Soon after, a token had appeared in his palm at an unknown time. The token had the imprint of a dragon carved on it. Kid, you want to use the Azure Dragon token to summon the Azure Dragon Palace? This thing is an immortal sacred artifact. If it's recognized, you don't need to stay in the Nine Nether Realm anymore. At that time, you'll definitely become a target for everyone. The moment Zhuowen took out the Azure Dragon token, Xiao He in his sea of consciousness suddenly shouted out. The Azure Dragon Palace was Zhuowen's biggest trump card. After passing through the second layer of heaven, Nguyen had 3 chances to summon the Azure Dragon Palace. Of course, with Zhuowen's current level, it was impossible for him to fully display the power of the Azure Dragon Palace. But even if it was a part of its power, it was still extremely terrifying. I can't care that much. Today, I won't let Chen Shui go, even if it's the sect master of the Burning Heaven sect. Zhuowen roared in a low voice, like a crazy beast. With a pinch of his right hand, the Azure Dragon token instantly exploded with an extremely terrifying light. This guy. What is he doing? This light was extremely dazzling, almost illuminating the entire sky of the divine nether realm. Elder Raiwa and Yen Ruhua were the closest to each other, so they couldn't help but cover their eyes to block this strong light. Ooh. A heaven-shaking dragon roar came from the depths of the ground. Following that, the ground of the entire divine nether realm began to tremble. Moreover, the frequency of the trembling became higher and higher, as if something was surging out from below. Boom. Following that, the rest of the people were shocked to find that the ground beneath Zhuowen's feet began to crack. A large hall emerged from the ground, carrying Zhuowen as it slowly floated up. This hall was extremely large, even larger than Xiao He's dragon body. Surrounding the hall was a huge pale white dragon. This huge dragon was coiled up, without any signs of life, but its aura was extremely terrifying. It was this huge pale white dragon that was carrying the hall up into the sky. This hall's aura is so terrifying. Elder Raiwa's pupils shrank as he muttered to himself. Zhou Tianzong's eyes narrowed. He never thought that Zhuowen would suddenly summon a large hall. Moreover, the aura on the surface of this hall actually moved even him. Could this hall be a sacred weapon? And it's at least a ascended sacred weapon? Zhou Tianzong's voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it clearly. It's at least a ascended sacred weapon? Everyone's breathing suddenly became rapid. Whether it was Elder Raiwa, Sapphire Shore, or even Yen Ji, they all revealed a look of shock. A ascended sacred weapon was already an extremely rare existence in the Eastern Land. As for a ascended sacred weapon, it was probably even rarer. In the entire 9th Netherworld realm, perhaps only the Blue Dragon Hall and Fine Theology Academy had it. Moreover, it was the lowest level of ascended sacred weapon. Everyone could feel that the hall in front of them was extraordinary. Even if it was an ascended sacred weapon, it was probably a top-notch existence. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.